The internet changed how we lived. Suddenly, everyone wanted a computer, including my family. We finally got one a couple of years back. Initially, it was a novelty. My wife used it for email and games, while the kids used it for homework and gaming. I browsed the web and watched adult content. I often worked late, leaving the factory at midnight. Unlike many guys, I headed straight home. Alone in the quiet house, I'd sit at the computer. Eventually, I got bored and started reading stories online. I became intrigued by tales of infidelity. These stories made me suspicious of my wife. I started scrutinizing her behavior, even arguing with her. Despite her reassurances, I couldn't shake my doubts. I read less over time, but the thoughts lingered. I even wondered about my own reactions if I caught her cheating. Would it turn me on? Discussing this with Deb only led to more questions. Our relationship had begun innocently enough, but doubts crept in. Deb's sister Sandy had a reputation for promiscuity. Though I'd been wild in my youth too, Sandy's behavior was on another level. Her carnal exploits were well known, including involvement in ménage à trois. I knew Bob from work. He was a day shift supervisor who got transferred. He invited me to his wedding with Sandy, who was just as wild as him. I wasn't fond of Bob because of his behavior towards Deb. Despite Deb's reassurances, I made it clear I'd protect her from him. We agreed to keep our past relationships private due to jealousy. Our conflicting work schedules strained our marriage. I didn't want to encounter someone Deb had slept with. Nor did I want to admit I'd been with her sister when our kids were young. Despite our differences, we managed to get along, though we didn't see each other much. Deb asked me to fix Sandy's leaking sink, knowing Bob was useless with repairs. I promised to take care of it on my way to work. While I worked, thoughts of Sandy's lifestyle as a possible wanton lingered, fueled by Bob's revelations. Despite Sandy's advances, I joked to keep things light. She didn't tempt me enough to risk my marriage. Arriving at Sandy's house, she greeted me provocatively. As I fixed the clog caused by eggshells and potato peels, Sandy hovered nearby, emphasizing her availability. "What are you doing, Sandy?" "I want you." "Stop it, Sandy. I'm trying to finish this job." She paused briefly, allowing me to complete the task. When I stood up, she persisted. "Are you going to sleep with me now?" "No, Sandy, I can't do that. Deb is your sister and I love her. I won't cheat on her, especially not with her sister." "Have you forgotten how it was in high school? Are you too good to sleep with me now?" "Sandy, please, I love Deb." "She doesn't know about our past together unless you tell her. You're a beautiful woman." "But I love Deb." "You foolish man. Either you'll sleep with me or I'll tell Deb you did it anyway. She'll believe me. After all, I'm her sister." "Why are you doing this? Why hurt us? Deb is your sister and she loves you." Sandy laughed. "My innocent sister thinks she's perfect. Let's see how she reacts when I spill the truth." "Sandy, don't do this. I won't have lovemaking with you. And I'll tell Deb about our past in school. I know she'll understand." Grabbing my tools, I declared I was finished with her sink. I left in my truck, my mind racing. Would Sandy lie to Deb? At work, I tried calling Deb, but she wasn't home. I left a message, expressing my love and the need to talk about her sister. The day dragged on, with my thoughts consumed by the impending conversation. By evening, I called home again, but no one answered. Deb had left with Sandy and Bob, leaving the kids with me. I decided to keep them overnight. "Is something wrong, Ray?" asked Deb's mom. "No, it's okay. If you see her, tell her I love her and I'll see her tonight. I have to get back to work." For me, it was one of the longest nights. I knew I had to confess about Sandy before I met Deb. Finally, my workday ended, and I headed home, bracing myself for the inevitable conversation. Pulling up to the house, I noticed Sandy's car parked in the driveway, signaling an imminent confrontation. Unlocking the door, I was met with a shocking sight. My wife, Deb, Bob, and Sandy in compromising positions. Anger surged through me as chaos erupted. Waking up in the hospital, I found Patrolman Gene Andrews by my side, explaining the events that had led to my injury. Confusion clouded my mind as I tried to make sense of the situation. "I see you're conscious now. I'm Patrolman Gene Andrews." "Where am I? And where's my wife? What happened?" "Take it easy, Mr. Harper. You have a concussion from a blow to the head with a glass vase. There was a fight at your home, and though charges were initially considered, they've been dropped. You're lucky. It could have meant 18 months in jail. What about the attack on me?" "Witnesses say you were in a scuffle with your brother-in-law when his wife intervened, hitting you with the vase to stop the fight. It was a single blow to halt the altercation. You should be grateful the charges were dismissed." "Where was my wife during all this?" When we arrived, she was ill from excessive drinking, according to your sister-in-law. You became upset with her, leading to a confrontation with your son-in-law who was trying to protect her. Your wife doesn't recall much, only that there was shouting. If the charges are dropped, why are you here? My supervisor called when you weren't home yet and instructed me to wait for your statement. So, what happened? I have nothing to say. I wasn't going to broadcast that I found my wife with another man. I just lay there and said nothing. Okay, it's your call. The doctor says you'll need to stay until tomorrow. Consider yourself fortunate no charges were pressed. You're lucky, Mr. Harper. The officer departed, leaving me with a pounding headache. What now? I couldn't bear the thought of living with a cheating wife, but I needed answers. I phoned my sister to pick me up the next day. I couldn't rely on Debbie, not after this. As I waited for Amy to arrive, the phone rang. It was Deb. Should I come get you? We need to talk now that we're square. Square? What are you talking about? You cheated with Bob and you think we're even. Amy's on her way. I just want to grab my things and go. What do you mean leave? I was just evening the score for what you did, Deb retorted. I'm not discussing this over the phone. Amy and I will come to pick up my things, and we can talk then. I hung up and waited for Amy. She arrived shortly, and we drove to my house. I asked her to wait in the car to avoid any conflict. Knocking on the door, Deb answered. I inquired about the kids, and she mentioned they were at her mom's. Beginning the conversation, I addressed her response to my message. Did you listen to my voicemail? Yes. Sandy claimed you coerced her into having lovemaking. How could you? I didn't do that. That's why I left the message. I went to fix her plumbing and she made advances. I refused, but she persisted, threatening to lie to you about us. I don't believe you. She wouldn't lie to me. She's envious of our marriage and wanted to break us apart. Letting Bob sleep with you was part of their swinging lifestyle. They got what they wanted and our marriage suffered. No, that's false. I did it for revenge. You assaulted my sister, so I slept with Bob to even the score. Sandy even knew physical engaging details about you, like your uncircumcised state and the mole on your upper thigh. Your sister is promiscuous. She knew because I was involved with her in high school, like many others. I kept it from you because I liked you and didn't want to jeopardize our relationship. Then you said we should bury our past. I'm unsure what to believe. Sandy is my sister, and you're my husband. Instead of asking me, you let Bob... Did you really think raping your sister would fix things? You must have wanted him badly to believe them. But Sandy's claims... I don't care what your sister says. It's not just about Bob, it's about you not trusting me enough to discuss the accusations. If I had assaulted her, why didn't she report it? She didn't want to cause a family scandal, but she had no qualms about involving the police last night. She didn't cry maltreatment because it didn't happen. You can believe whoever, but this marriage is over. Why would you want to be with a rapist? No, you desired Bob and used me as an excuse. That's not true. I love you. Look up, love. It doesn't involve sleeping with others. I'll grab my things now and see you next week for the rest. I'm consulting a lawyer Monday to start the divorce process. Ray, hold on. This isn't how it was planned. Sandy said she forgave you and you'd forgive me. I only wanted revenge. No, you slept with Bob. And your sister. I grabbed my suitcase, packing a few things. What about the kids? Tell them what you want. I'm done with this. I'll arrange visits through a lawyer and Amy can help with the kids. I don't want to speak to you again. I left. Amy drove me to a budget motel. On the way, I told her everything. She knew I was truthful. Weeks passed. It was tough. I worked extra for expenses, found a cheap place and ate out mostly. In the divorce, assets split equally. Child support didn't bother me. I love my kids. I miss Debbie, but know it's over. Attended school events, avoiding Debbie's family, saw my kids weekly. Deb called often. I listened about kids, but hung up when she brought up us. Visited Amy's for dinner and played with kids. Sandy stuck to her story, leaving Deb torn. I had no proof. It was my word against Sandy's. Deb believed her, which hurt the most. One afternoon, the school called saying Kyle wasn't well. I fetched him and found he had a cold. I informed Debbie, who taught middle school, and she said she'd come home soon. After checking Kyle's temperature, which was slightly elevated, I waited with him. An hour later, Debbie arrived. As she went to check on Kyle, the phone rang. Without thinking, I answered. It was Sandy. "What are you doing there?" she asked. "Well, look who's calling the shots. Kyle was sick, so I brought him home. Thanks for ruining our marriage." I recorded the conversation, forgetting the answering machine was on. "Is he okay?" Why do you care? You're the reason his parents split. Ray, things got out of hand. You knew we were wantons, and Bob wanted your wife. If you had just slept with me, none of this would have happened. But instead, you came home and started a fight. You accused me of maltreatment and made Bob assault Deb. What kind of sister are you? Bob didn't force her. She willingly slept with him, and she'd probably do it again. She was drunk, and you filled her head with lies, then watched your husband violate her. Ray, you can't prove anything. I warned you Deb would believe me. If you need action, call me. Tell Deb to ring me later. Hope Kyle feels better. She hung up and I turned off the recorder. Debbie asked who called, and I told her it was Sandy. Your angel sister, who never lies to you, I replied. What did she want? I recorded her message. She said to call her back. See you in court Thursday. I guess it's our Freedom Day. Don't forget to listen to the message, I said, heading to my truck. My phone rang persistently on the way home, about 10 times. When I finally answered, it was Debbie apologizing, claiming Sandy told her the truth about not being maltreatmented. Good to know, but it doesn't change my mind. You slept with Bob without giving me a chance to explain. Despite telling you the truth, you chose your sister's tale, thinking I was a rapist. I loved you, maybe always will, but I also hate you for what you did to our family and the distrust you had for me. On Thursday, I took 2 days off work, signed the divorce petition at my attorney's office, and left before Deb arrived. Depressed, I went to the neighborhood bar where I saw Bob. Without hesitation, I punched him repeatedly until I was pulled away by others. Dragged off by the police, I was taken to jail. I made one call, reaching out to my sister Amy. I confessed my actions and insisted she shouldn't post bail. I'd face my sentence. Tears flowed when we hung up. Debbie tried to visit me in prison, but I declined to see her. Nearly 2 months later, my case went to court. I pleaded guilty to assault and received a 2-year sentence, minus time served. Amy stored my belongings, informing me that Debbie was unwell and wished to see me. I refused. Deb truly loves you. Her family is furious about Sandy's accusations. Also, Debbie never showed up to sign the divorce papers. So legally, you're still married, Amy informed me. Prison life was harsh, fights were routine, and I had to earn respect. My cellmate, Keeler, was a lifer with a violent past. Despite our rough start, he eventually opened up to me. Then, surprisingly, Debbie visited me one day. What brings you here? I questioned, feigning anger, though she looked lovely and tender. Ray, I still love you. I've made mistakes, she confessed, offering me photos of our kids, tears streaming down her face. I've moved on. Take care of our kids, I replied, receiving the pictures. I didn't finalize the divorce. I'll wait for you no matter how long, she pleaded. I felt torn. Despite her mistakes, I still loved her. Leaving her by the window, I walked back to my cell. In the kitchen, I overheard plans to confront Keeler. Without being a snitch, I informed him, hoping to save a life. The next day, unsure if Keeler believed me, I stood my ground. He assured me he'd handle it discreetly, earning my gratitude. He concealed 2 books under his shirt, shielding his kidneys. Across from him, 3 allies sat at a nearby table. As the attacker approached and lunged with a knife, Keeler remained composed. The blade struck the books, its dullness preventing penetration. Keeler's comrades subdued the assailant until guards intervened. The attacker was isolated, while Keeler resumed his meal unfazed. It was astonishing how Keeler remained composed. He confided in me regularly after the incident. Despite his tough exterior, he was a different person behind bars. Keeler inquired about my family, sharing his own story of estrangement. His daughter Angie remained loyal, though he protected her from prison life. He cherished her deeply, proud of her career as a lawyer. I recounted my ordeal with Sandy and Debbie to Keeler. Do you still love her? He asked. Yes, but I can't forgive her, I replied. Keeler urged me not to hold on to grudges, sharing his own regrets. His words left me pondering my future upon release. Without a job or family, what would I do? The following month, Debbie visited me again, her eyes teary but smiling. She handed me drawings from the kids, portraying us as a family. They miss you, Ray, and I miss you terribly. Can you forgive me? Can we rebuild our family? I've cut ties with Sandy and Bob. I regret not trusting you, I confessed. Doubt lingered. Would she believe me if faced with accusations again? Deb, I want to forgive you, but it's hard. Seeing you with Bob is etched in my mind. Did you have feelings for him? No, I despised it. I felt sick when you walked in. I regret my actions deeply. I only want you, Ray, the father of our children, she pleaded. Weeks later, Amy visited with unsettling news. I saw Sandy and Bob together at the house. I don't know why. I thought you should know. Confusion swirled. Had Deb lied again? I was ready to forgive, but now doubted her honesty. I needed to understand why Deb was reconnecting with Susan and Bob. A month later, Killer and I spoke, and he expressed gratitude for my past help. He, a former lawyer, offered to leverage his connections to potentially secure my release from parole. Though uncertain, I trusted him. Keeler's integrity stood firm, despite his criminal background. I respected his stature and refrained from probing further, choosing to accept his word. A few weeks later, I was summoned to the warden's office for the parole board meeting. The prison governor was the first to address me. "Mr. Harper, we have a parole application for you. After reviewing your file, we noted your initial struggle to adjust. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir. I found prison life challenging, but I tried to adapt." "If released earlier, where would you have lived and worked?" I had to think quickly, realizing the importance of my response. "Well, sir, my sister and her husband offered me a place to stay, and my previous employer expressed willingness to rehire me." "Aren't you married, Mr. Harper?" "Yes, sir, but we were in the process of divorce when I was sentenced. I'm uncertain about our future." "We appreciate your candor. We knew about your marital status and wanted to gauge your honesty." "Regarding recidivism, we're cautious about early releases. I assure you, I'm committed to staying out of prison." "Return to your cell, Mr. Harper. We'll notify you of our decision by month end." "Thank you, sir, for considering my parole." Back in the cell, Keeler inquired about the meeting. I shared my responses and asked if he had any involvement. "You never know, but if you're released early, I'll expect a weekly box of cigarettes on my account," he chuckled. A few days later, Debbie returned, mentioning a parole board representative had visited. "Are you getting paroled?" she inquired anxiously. "What did they say?" he nervously questioned. "They asked about our living arrangements, and if you'll be staying here," she replied, adding, "I'd love to have you back." Changing the subject, he queried about her interactions with Sandy and Bob. "She's my sister. I don't see her much," she responded defensively. "And Bob?" he pressed. "Why all the questions?" she retorted, visibly uneasy. "You promised not to see Sandy, yet they were here together. Did something happen with Bob again? Tell him when I'm out, I'll settle things. And if you're having fun with him in the meantime, I'll deal with it," he asserted. Deb hastily exited the room, confirming his suspicions. He phoned his sister Amy, informing her of the encounter, and she assured him of her support. "Did the parole board contact Mr. Parker about my job?" he inquired. "Yes, they did. He said you could return. You were one of his top employees," she reassured. "You've given me hope," he acknowledged gratefully. "They mentioned you're likely to be released next month. Considering you have a place to live and a job," she added tearfully. Amy's words buoyed his spirits. I received a call informing me of my upcoming release next week. They provided the name of the lawyer handling my case and instructed me to report to the agency promptly after my release. It puzzled me why I had to meet with a lawyer instead of a parole officer. However, I learned that the law firm facilitated my release, handling paperwork, explaining my parole terms, and arranging a meeting with a parole officer. I expressed gratitude to Keeler, remembering our agreement about the cigarettes. Regardless of his involvement in my parole, the prospect of freedom was worth a weekly box of cigarettes. As I stepped outside the gate, my sister Amy awaited me tearfully. We shared a hug and a brotherly kiss. Inside Amy's house, her husband welcomed me warmly. Amy mentioned that Debbie, after consulting with a lawyer while I was incarcerated, had initiated the divorce proceedings. It seemed my suspicions about Deb were confirmed. Yet now, I was a free man. Knowing I needed to arrange visitation with my kids, I called Deb's house beforehand to ensure she was available. I clarified that I sought no trouble and suggested we discuss arrangements on her porch. Reluctantly, she agreed, warning of involving the police if there was any disturbance. As I arrived at the house, my children rushed to me, shouting, "Daddy! Daddy! You're back!" I embraced them tightly, feeling the depth of my longing for them. After a brief chat, I urged them to ride their bikes, recalling how their mother and I used to watch them from the porch. "Debbie, these kids are mine too. I want to be a part of their lives," I asserted, frustrated by her dismissive attitude. "I was willing to forgive you, but you went back to Bob and Sandy. I won't tolerate exposing my children to their lifestyle," I warned sternly, emphasizing the seriousness of my intent. Debbie insisted she wouldn't subject the kids to that lifestyle and claimed she had changed. "Actions speak louder than words," I reminded her skeptically. After bidding my kids farewell, I discussed their well-being and promised to spend more time with them once I found a nearby apartment. As I left, a sense of unease settled over me, knowing I needed legal guidance in this complex situation. I hadn't spoken to the lawyer who secured my parole. Approaching the receptionist, I presented the card from the parole board. "May I see Mr. A.J. Brady, please? I have an appointment. I'm Ray Harper," I stated. The receptionist assured me Brady would see me shortly and directed me to take a seat. While waiting, I wondered if she had said Miss Brady. The card indicated A.J. Brady, so I assumed it was a man. Lost in thought, I was taken aback when a stunning woman in a dark blue suit approached. She greeted me with a smile, dimples, and shoulder-length dark hair. As she extended her hand for a handshake, she introduced herself as A.J. Brady. "Ray Harper, I presume," she said. "I've been asked to review your case. From what I've gathered, you didn't receive fair representation. Let's discuss further in my office," she added, instructing the receptionist to hold calls. "Yes, Miss Brady," the receptionist responded. I followed her into her office. If she had asked, I would have followed her anywhere. She was strikingly beautiful. "Well, Mr. Harper, we finally meet," she said. "Please call me Ray," I replied gratefully. "I owe you my life, but I'm curious, why me?" "A friend of mine asked me to look into your case," she explained. "Your lawyer failed to mention key details like your recent divorce and extenuating circumstances. I presented these to the parole board, who agreed your sentence was excessive." "Why me, Miss Brady? Who hired you? Can I call you AJ?" I inquired. "Look, Ray, a friend asked for my help and I delivered. Knowing who hired me isn't crucial. And yes, you can call me AJ," she replied. "There are some things we need to discuss." "Would you join me for lunch?" I asked. "I don't usually meet clients outside the office," she replied. "It's not a date, just lunch," I clarified. "All right, Ray, let's call it a business meeting over lunch," she agreed, flashing a smile. "I'll let Mary know we're leaving, and then we can go." I watched her rise. She exuded a rare blend of charm and professionalism for a lawyer. We dined at a tranquil restaurant. Over lunch, she briefed me on meeting my parole officer, regular visits, adherence to rules, and staying clear of trouble. "Angie, share something about yourself," I requested. "Ray, discussing my personal life with a client wouldn't be appropriate," she responded. "Your smile is captivating," I complimented, prompting her blush. "Tell me about your legal background," I persisted. She revealed her scholarship-acquired law degree and experience in criminal law. As we ate, Angie lingered in my thoughts. "Will I see you again?" I inquired. "Return next week for paperwork with your parole officer." "We can have lunch then," she agreed, softening slightly. After lunch, we returned to the office. When she extended her hand, I held it briefly, pondering her thoughts. We bid farewell, and I eagerly anticipated our next lunch. Her secretary's smile hinted at the rarity of such interactions, a testament to Angie's uniqueness. I returned to work, swiftly completing tasks as if it were second nature. My colleagues seemed to regard me with newfound respect, and no one dared to challenge me. For 2 consecutive Mondays, I met with Angie, initially maintaining a professional relationship. However, by the 4th week, she informed me that our business collaboration had ceased. "Are you still my lawyer?" I inquired. "Certainly. Call me if you encounter any issues," she assured. "Angie, I regret to inform you that I must terminate our arrangement," I confessed. "Terminate? After all I've done to assist you?" she exclaimed. "Yes. I desire more than a professional connection. I want to take you on a genuine date. Get to know you better," I expressed. "Ray, I'm conflicted. There's an attraction, but what will people think?" she pondered. "I don't care about perceptions. Just join me once. If it doesn't feel right, we won't repeat it. Let's follow our hearts," I urged. After hesitation, she reluctantly agreed. "I'll go, but don't expect anything more," she cautioned, surprised by her own words. Angie agreed, and on Saturday, we took a drive. I borrowed a car from my sister, opting not to use my old truck. Arriving at her townhouse, I was greeted by a stunning woman as she opened the door. Despite individual perceptions, to me, she appeared breathtaking. Resisting the urge to embrace her immediately, I reminded myself to act as a gentleman, though it wasn't easy. At a fancy restaurant, we enjoyed wine followed by dinner. Afterward, we conversed while listening to music. "Angie, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up? I noticed your last name differs from your father's," I inquired. "You know my story, Ray. My parents' relationship was troubled, ending in my father's incarceration for the past 14 years. Raised by extended family, I, the youngest, was only 14 when it all unfolded. It was a difficult time. Despite loving him, my siblings couldn't forgive our father for his actions. I harbored guilt for revealing my mother's infidelity to him. Perhaps if I had stayed silent, things might have been different. Angie, you shouldn't blame yourself for your mom's decease or your dad's imprisonment. You were just a child trying to do the right thing, I reassured her. After my father was incarcerated, I resolved to attend college and pursue a career in law, hoping to assist him with a lighter sentence. That's why I specialized in criminal law. Despite my efforts, there wasn't much I could do for him, Angie explained. As for your question about my marital status, I wasn't married long, and it's not something I want to discuss, she replied with a smile. Ray, can we table this conversation for another time? I'm enjoying our evening together, and I'd rather not dwell on these topics. Would you like to dance? She suggested. I'm not much of a dancer, but I'd love to hold you close, I responded. As we danced, I embraced Angie, cherishing the moment. Ray, I have trust issues, especially with men due to my social circles. I'm just being upfront with you. If it weren't for my father's intervention, I might not have agreed to this date, Angie admitted. I'll make sure to send your father some extra cigarettes. Angie, you mean a lot to me, and I'll do whatever it takes to earn your trust. If I overstep, just let me know, and I'll respect your boundaries, I promised. When I dropped her off that night, I kissed her at the door, leaving her in silence. She kissed me again and leaned back. Can I come in, Angie? Not today, Ray. It's too soon. Maybe next Saturday? That could work. Give me a call on Thursday. I returned home, filled with happiness. We got together the next 2 Saturdays. During our time together, she opened up more. Ray, I want you to know me better. If we're going to keep seeing each other, I won't hide anything. I've been married before, as I mentioned. It happened during my freshman year of college. My boyfriend and I thought we were in love, so we got married after I got pregnant. But we soon realized we were too young, and the marriage failed. I had a mishap, and we ended up divorcing. I kept the last name Brady to distance myself from my maiden name Miller, as my father insisted. I felt relieved that she trusted me with her story. She asked about my kids, expressing interest in meeting them. I had already told them about her, and my daughter was eager to meet her. Angie, would you like to join us? My sister is hosting a family barbecue next Saturday, and you're invited. It would mean a lot to me if you came. I knew it was a significant step for us. She avoided eye contact, indicating she understood the importance of this invitation. After a deep breath, she looked at me and kissed me passionately, a first for us. Pulling back, she took another breath. Okay, Ray, I'll come. What can I bring? I wasn't sure what women typically brought to these gatherings, so I suggested Amy could discuss it with her. When I informed Amy about Angie attending the party, the guest list expanded. Everyone wanted to meet her. My parents, cousins, aunts, and uncles all showed up. Angie offered to make potato salad. Amy mentioned how sweet Angie sounded on the phone, hinting at her hopes for our relationship. Every weekend, I visited Deb's house to pick up my kids. We'd either hang out at Amy's or do something fun together. I asked about their mother respectfully. Kyle mentioned she was dating a man, which concerned me initially. But Kayla reassured me. He was their school teacher named Pat. He'd lost his wife to leukemia and had moved to start anew. He had a daughter their age, whom Kyle and Kayla liked. I need to tell you something, Deb. Your deceit and infidelity destroyed us. If you value this man, treat him right. Most importantly, be truthful with him. Don't repeat the same mistakes you made with us. Pat cares for our children and treats them well. He's aware of your existence and acknowledges you as their father. I hope things work out for us. I hope I haven't tarnished your future relationships. Ray, you're a decent man, and I believe you'll find the right partner. I'm just sorry for the pain I caused you. After bidding farewell, I drove home. I rented a small apartment about a mile from Deb and the kids. Opted for a 2-bedroom place so the kids have a spot when they're with me. I still swing by Amy's a couple times a week, usually for a meal, but I enjoy visiting them too. As the barbecue day arrived, I felt anxious. Waiting outside, I felt immense relief seeing Angie's car pull up. She greeted me with a smile, offering a bowl of potato salad. Make sure to have some, she teased. She looked stunning. I couldn't see her any other way. Being with her made me feel elated. I realized I'd fallen for her, even though we'd only shared kisses. Some things you just know. I hoped she felt something for me too. Introducing her as my good friend, I watched as she mingled with everyone. Mom and Dad instantly took a liking to her. Dad even quipped, "Don't let her get away, Ray. We already adore her and we barely know her." Angie glanced at me and smiled. When I introduced her to Amy, their mutual glance seemed like positive reinforcement. Ray, I never mentioned this, but I encountered your sister during the parole interviews. I didn't bring it up as it wasn't relevant until now. I never anticipated we'd become acquaintances. I assured you of my honesty, which is why I'm disclosing this now. Amy and I hadn't communicated since your parole until she contacted me about the potato salad. Have you conversed with anyone else I should be aware of? Yes, I've spoken to Deb, your ex-wife, Sue, and Bob, naturally. Additionally, I liaised with your employer to secure your position considering those involved in the bar incident and your arrest. I handled all of this as your legal representative. I never foresaw developing feelings for you, especially without meeting. I regret not divulging this earlier, but as your attorney, I needed to ascertain the truth before fully supporting you. If you want me to depart, please say so, and I'll oblige. Leave, leave. All I heard was your declaration of love for me. I embraced her with a kiss, followed by a hug, and then introduced her to the rest of the family. I informed Angie I'd return shortly as I needed to pick up the kids, who were eager to meet her. Upon my return, Kayla approached and introduced herself to Angie. Hi, I'm Kayla. Are you Daddy's girlfriend? You're really pretty.
Just like Daddy said. Hi, Kayla. You can call me Angie or AJ. You're a very pretty girl, too. It's really nice to meet you, Kayla then said. Come meet my older brother. He's 10 and a bit shy around girls. Kyle, this is AJ, Daddy's friend. I observed Kyle shaking Angie's hand. She knelt down to chat with the kids at their level. The way they interacted indicated they were likely to become friends. I joined them, and Kyle, not typically talkative,
told me, "We like her, Daddy. She's so pretty and sweet." Angie simply glanced at me and smiled. The barbecue was fantastic as the evening progressed. While chatting with Angie, Kyle and Kayla approached us. Dad, remember you mentioned going to the amusement park in 2 weeks? Can Angie come with us? That way, when Kayla and I ride the attractions, you'll have someone to talk to. I attempted to convey to Kyle that such inquiries should be made in private. Angie might have other commitments or might not enjoy amusement parks. He glanced at Angie and apologized to her. Sorry, Angie. I didn't realize you weren't fond of amusement parks. Angie chuckled and knelt down, addressing Kyle. Sweetheart, what your daddy means is that those questions are better asked to him privately, not me. As for amusement parks, I adore them and would love to go. If it's all right with your daddy, perhaps you and I can enjoy the roller coaster together. Sure enough, we all headed to the amusement park, where the kids eagerly rode every attraction. Angie kept her promise to Kyle and rode the roller coaster with him, as well as the Ferris wheel. On our way back, Kayla remarked, Dad, you should get a car instead of your truck. Angie can't always use hers. We won't all fit in your truck. We chuckled at Kayla's observation, realizing she was correct. Over the following weeks, I didn't see much of Angie. Work kept me busy on weekends, and she had court obligations. Although we spoke on the phone occasionally, it wasn't the same. One Saturday, I picked up the kids, and we decided to visit Chuck E. Cheese's, a pizza place with various games and prizes. After arriving home, Kayla asked if she could invite Angie to join us. Not wanting to disappoint her, I agreed to call Angie. Angie, I called out. Angie, it's Ray. Kayla wanted me to give you a call. Any plans for tonight? Oh, hey, Ray. I was going out with some friends. Oh, okay. Have a great time. Ray, you mentioned Kayla wanted to talk to me. Can you put her on the line, please? It's all right, Angie. Sure, that'd be nice. Could you pass the phone to Kayla? I could only hear one side of the conversation. Hey, Angie, Dad's taking Kyle and me to Chuck E. Cheese's for pizza and games. We thought you might want to join us. Yeah, okay. I'll let him know we miss you too. All right, bye. I felt bad for Kayla. I'm sorry, honey, but Angie already has plans. What do you mean, Dad? She said she'd be here in half an hour. She mentioned she's getting a car, so she doesn't always have to use hers. Yeah, Daddy, she said she misses us. Later that evening, after we returned from a pizza party where the kids won a bunch of stuffed animals thanks to Angie's skills at the games, I dropped them off at their mom's house. Angie expressed her desire for us to get to know each other better. We headed to my apartment and settled on the couch. Angie, you know I care about you, right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I want to be engaged with you. I haven't trusted a man in a long time. All I ask is for you to be gentle and caring. I don't want to feel used. I want to feel loved. We began on the couch and eventually moved to the bedroom, indulging in whatever pleased us. I pampered her feet with massages, licked whipped cream off her stomach, and explored every sensation. We spent hours caressing, massaging, and expressing our love. Holding her in my arms after lovemaking was when I felt most content. It was comforting to cuddle and feel her close to me, something I hadn't experienced in a long while. She ended up staying the entire night. I rose before her and prepared French toast for us. Emerging from the bedroom, she wore one of my t-shirts, which looked particularly fetching on her. I couldn't help but express my admiration for how wonderful she looked, even in the morning. After a quick shower, we sat down to talk. Angie, what do you envision for our future? You know how much I love you, and my children and family adore you. What are your thoughts on what comes next? Ray, I feel like I'm sounding like a lawyer. We've only known each other for a few months, and last night was our first time making love. I understand it's early, but I want you in my life every day. If we haven't had our fill of love, we can return to the bedroom and spend the whole day there. Angie smiled at the suggestion. Angie, I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me? Tears welled in Angie's eyes. Ray, I want you to know I don't take love lightly. I've made mistakes before, as I've told you. Yes, I will marry you. I promise to always be there for you and the kids. I know the pain of your past marriage, and I vow to be honest and faithful. I expect the same from you. She leaned in and kissed me passionately. Honey, what's on your mind? You seem happy yet sad, I inquired. These are my reflections on my dad, and how joyful he will be. Many young girls dream of their special wedding day, envisioning themselves in a white dress, escorted down the aisle by their father to meet their future spouse. I realize that won't be my reality, and it saddens me deeply. She shed quiet tears. Last time, my father wasn't even aware of my wedding. By the time I reached out to him, I had suffered a mishap and was on the path to divorce. I'm sorry, Ray, I shouldn't dwell on this now. After all, I'm marrying the man my father approves of, the one I've loved since our first meeting. What? You loved me from the start. I've wanted you since I laid eyes on you, but I guess you already knew that, I remarked, surprised. She gave me a sweet smile and asked when I wanted to set the date. I responded that it was entirely up to her. We both agreed it should happen as soon as possible. I asked if I could start spreading the news, and she said she would do the same. We just needed to settle on a date. We settled on 2 months from then. For the next few days, I was elated. I shared the news with Amy and her husband Kenny, who were thrilled for us. I needed to inform the kids. I called their home and connected with them both through the console so I could share the news simultaneously. They both exclaimed their happiness and expressed their fondness for Angie. I assured them it was happening in a couple of months, and that they were among the first to know. When I entered Angie's office, her secretary Mary congratulated me. She informed me that Angie had already spread the news and invited everyone to the wedding reception. Mary then called Angie and beckoned me in. Angie was waiting, tears silently streaming down her face. What's wrong, Angie? I called the prison, spoke to the warden, and requested a day's leave for my dad to attend our wedding. He informed me that my dad is prohibited from leaving the prison under any circumstances. His life sentence is final. He expressed regret, but said there was nothing he could do. I'm deeply sorry, Angie. I understand how much your father's presence means to you. It's deteriorating, Ray. Despite being in remission, Dad's cancer has resurfaced. He has 3 to 6 months left. Tears welled in her eyes, and I enveloped her in my arms. Why, Lord? Why put her through this? She's a good soul. My heart ached for her. Angie, I've been buying cigarettes for your dad since I got out. It was a deal between us. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. Dad doesn't smoke anymore. He uses the packs sent to him to trade with other inmates. You didn't cause his cancer. An idea sparked in my mind, but I hesitated to share it with Angie, not wanting to extinguish her hope. I kissed her goodbye, promising to see her the next day. I skipped work and headed to the prison to meet Keeler and the warden. Keeler greeted me with a smile. You take care of my girl, Ray. Just make her happy. She deserves better than what life's thrown her way. I pitched my idea to Keeler, met with initial resistance, but eventually secured his agreement pending the warden's approval. I bid him farewell, heading to the warden's office. The warden welcomed me. Well, Ray, I see you're staying composed and getting hitched. Sorry about Keeler, but as a lifer, we can't release him for his daughter's wedding. Warden, are you fully in charge here, making most decisions? What's your angle, Ray? Can we hold the wedding on the hotel premises, use the chapel, and Keeler can walk his daughter down the aisle? You want to marry here in prison just so her father can attend? That it? Yes, sir. She hasn't seen him in over 14 years, and he's on his end of the rope. We only need the chapel for the ceremony. I know weddings have happened here before. All right, Ray. I'll arrange it. Keep it small. You can invite 3 guests besides yourselves. Let Keeler bring some fellow inmates. You'll need a prison attendant. I expressed gratitude to the warden and hurried back to Keeler. "Dave," I called him by name, and he chuckled. The warden green-lighted the plan. "I'm off to tell Angie." "Thanks, Dave. It means the world to her." He smiled. "Ray, jot down this number." I noted it down for Angie. "When you visit the bank, ask Angie to bring her birth certificate. The account is registered under her maiden name." I jotted down, expressing sympathy for Dave's illness. "Just look after my little girl, that's all I ask," Dave responded. Returning to Angie's office, she noticed my smile and inquired what was happening. "You don't mind getting married in prison?" I questioned. "What? What's this about, Ray?" I recounted my conversation with the warden, mentioning that her father would be permitted to walk her down the aisle. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes. "God, I love you, Ray." I informed her about the safety deposit box, and we proceeded to inspect its contents. "I'm Angelina Juanita Miller, and I'd like to access my safety deposit box," Angie informed the attendant, who examined her birth certificate. He escorted us to the safe deposit box, unlocked it, and exited the room. The first thing we noticed was a note from her father. "Dear Angie, if you're opening this box, it means you're either getting married or I've already passed away. I hope it's the former. In the little box is your mother's engagement ring. I know everyone wondered where it went, but I put it here for safekeeping. I want you to have it and wear it with pride. Your mother had her faults, but she loved you, and I know she would want you to have her wedding ring. There are also bonds here, totaling over $15,000 that will help pay for your wedding. I formalized them before I was sent away. When you see your brother and sister, tell them there's a box for each of them too, if they haven't gotten theirs yet. Only yours has a ring in it. Congratulations, and always be honest with your husband. With love, Daddy." Angie and I discussed our wedding plans, opting to invite her brother Brad and sister Lisa, along with my sister Amy. We plan to extend invitations to family and friends for the reception, scheduled shortly after the ceremony. Angie and Amy dedicated the following month to preparing for the event, although it incurred additional expenses due to the short notice. However, I was determined to fulfill as much of Angie's dream as possible. Amy volunteered to capture the event with her digital camera. We visited Angie's siblings, where she introduced me to them. They clarified that while they didn't harbor animosity towards their father, they disapproved of his actions. Angie elucidated the significance of the wedding and the circumstances surrounding it, leading Brad and Lisa to tears upon learning of their father's terminal condition. After agreeing to attend, Angie provided them with their bank deposit box numbers, revealing their father's unexpected provisions. On the wedding day, Angie and I drove to the prison together, accompanied by Amy and her husband, who waited in the car. Upon our arrival, I arranged for a costume for Keeler, delivered by a guard, while I donned the rented tuxedo. Amy assisted Angie with her wedding attire in another room, as Angie preferred I not see her until the ceremony. Inside the chapel, I awaited Angie's entrance alongside Brad and Lisa, who would serve as my best man and Angie's maid of honor, respectively. A prisoner played the piano, setting a solemn atmosphere, while additional prisoners, friends of Keeler Dave, were seated. The warden, accompanied by the priest, announced refreshments after the ceremony, displaying unexpected kindness. As "Here Comes the Bride" filled the chapel, everyone rose to their feet. Angie entered, escorted by her father, tears streaming down both their faces. Angie's wish had been granted. Her father would walk her down the aisle on her wedding day. Once they reached the front, the audience took their seats, leaving only the small wedding party standing. Another guard entered and shut the door. The priest inquired, "Who presents this woman to marry this man?" "Yes, sir," Dave responded proudly before taking his seat. "Angelina Juanita Miller Brady, do you accept Raymond Michael Harper as your husband?" The priest proceeded with the ceremony, posing the same question to me. We both solemnly affirmed, "To love and cherish from this day forward." It reflected our mutual commitment. Nothing would ever come between us. With challenging pasts, we were determined to make our marriage succeed. After exchanging vows, I kissed the bride. Angie then embraced and kissed her father. We adjourned to an adjoining room to chat briefly and partake in cake and punch provided by the warden. Brad and Lisa approached their father, embracing him for the first time in nearly 15 years. Tears flowed, mingling joy with remorse. Aware of their father's terminal condition, they sought to reaffirm their love for him. Amy documented moments throughout the ceremony, capturing heartfelt interactions among Dave and his children. Her photos, encompassing tears, embraces, and even some laughter, were swiftly developed and enlarged at a 24-hour photo center. Expressing gratitude to Dave and the warden for fulfilling Angie's wish, we bid them farewell. As we departed, Brad and Lisa were still engaged in conversation with their father, a heartening sight. Returning to town for the reception, we were greeted enthusiastically by all our invited guests. Kyle and Kayla eagerly embraced us upon our arrival, their excitement palpable. Entering the auditorium, we were met with jubilant cheers. Tears welled in the eyes of my parents and nearly everyone who greeted us. Angie's friends, many unfamiliar to me, also welcomed us warmly. Notably, Mary approached, offering hugs of congratulations. Around 30 minutes later, Amy arrived with the photographs. She enlarged several of them and laid them out on the table for everyone to view. Brad and Lisa stopped by to collect their families. Brad was accompanied by his wife and 2 children, while Lisa was with her husband and 3 children. They all gathered around Dave's picture, explaining to the kids that he was their grandfather. Amy informed them that she had taken 4 sets of photos, and after the reception, each family would receive 1 set to take home. There was one for Brad and Lisa, one for Angie and me, and naturally, one for Amy. I must mention how stunning Angie looked in her wedding gown. If she had wings, she would have resembled an angel sent by God. She was the most exquisite woman I had ever seen, and now she was my wife. I believe most men feel similarly about their wives. We danced, dined, and danced some more, accompanied by the clinking of glasses. Our lips were practically inseparable throughout the evening. Colleagues at work told me I was incredibly fortunate, but trust me, I didn't need to be reminded. I knew I had found something precious, and I intended to cherish it forever. For those curious, Deb and Pat were absent from our wedding. It was Angie's special day, and I wanted nothing to mar it. Witnessing her and her father walking down the aisle, seeing her brother and sister reconcile with their father, and witnessing the family coming together once more. These are moments I will never forget. Update. It's been 6 months since our wedding. Debbie and Pat tied the knot last month. I'm glad to see Debbie making a genuine effort to turn her life around. My kids report that Pat is treating them well. I inquired about Aunt Sue and Uncle Bob, and my kids informed me they relocated to another state. I transitioned to the day shift to spend more time with the kids and be home with Angie every night. Angie became pregnant with our baby 3 months after our wedding. Dave Keeler passed away. The kids visited him monthly until his passing. It was a somber moment, but we were able to share the news of Angie's pregnancy with him. We informed him it was a boy, and we planned to name him David Raymond. That brought a smile to Dave's face. Reflecting on everything, the betrayal of my cheating wife, meeting the woman of my dreams in prison, and marrying her, I realize I'm starting anew and preparing to become a father once more. Not a day passes without me thanking God for all I have. I'm grateful for the opportunity He's given Angie and me to find happiness again. That's all. Ray and Josie had spent 40 years together, raising 2 children, Christine and Leo, and enjoying the fruits of their hard work. Ray, now retired, stayed active by playing golf despite some heart problems. Josie, energetic for her age, focused on maintaining their home. Though their marriage had faced challenges, it had settled into a familiar routine. However, cracks started to form. Josie, once content with their slower lifestyle, began to crave more. Ray believed they had adjusted to his health limitations, but Josie felt otherwise. Her growing dissatisfaction went unnoticed by Ray, creating an emotional distance that opened the door to something unexpected. One morning, Ray's golf game was canceled due to heavy rain. Disappointed, he returned home earlier than usual, not bothering to warn Josie. When he entered the house, he was stunned to see Josie in a pink silk robe, standing with a much younger man. At 59, Josie still had an attractive figure, which clearly hadn't gone unnoticed by this stranger. As Ray walked in, Josie greeted him with a smile and attempted to kiss him, but he pulled away. "Are you out of your mind, Josie? I'd rather not know where your mouth's been, though I can guess," Ray said, disgusted. Realizing what she had nearly done, Josie quickly introduced the young man, Luke, to her husband. Luke was about an inch shorter than Ray, but his fit, athletic build showed he was likely in his 20s or 30s, possibly a former college athlete. His short brown hair and average face didn't stand out, but he confidently placed a hand on Ray's shoulder. Ray held back the urge to react violently. "Nice to meet you. Josie has told me a lot about you. Don't worry, In 25 or 30 years, I'll probably have the same issues you think I have. Ray missed the closeness with Josie, but thought they were doing fine with some adjustments. Luke's smug smile irritated him, but Ray kept his cool. Luke, get out of my house. If I see you here again, I'll eliminate you. I have a weapon. Luke's grin vanished as he quickly left, mumbling, I thought you didn't mind. Ray locked the door and stormed to his bedroom, furious that Josie seemed unbothered by what had just happened. She followed him in, now with her robe closed. That was rude, she remarked. Ray, still in disbelief, snapped. Rude? I walk in on you with some guy you just slept with and I'm the rude one? You're out of your mind. Josie softened, trying to touch Ray's shoulder, but he pulled away. I'm sorry, Ray. What we had was nice, but it wasn't enough for me. You could have told me that. Where did you even find this guy? He's a friend of Marjorie's. When she didn't want him, she gave me his information. He's just using you for easy Zex. Maybe, but I'm using him too. So what difference does it make? Josie said calmly. How long has this been going on? A few months. He comes when you're golfing, takes care of me, and leaves before you're back. It doesn't affect you. You get your exercise, I get mine. Ray suddenly realized why Saturdays had become linen-changing days. I don't care if I'm not here, I'm done with this. I'll give up golf if I have to. Ray, be smart. You need your golf. This works for both of us. Maybe for you, Josephine, but not for me. This was the last time. Ray went to his room to shower and change into something casual. Meanwhile, Josie dressed and drove to Christine's house, where her daughter lived with her husband and 2 daughters. By the time Ray finished showering, the house was empty. With no note left, he assumed Josie needed space, which suited him fine since he felt the same. The shower helped Ray calm down. While he understood Josie's needs, he couldn't justify her actions. He knew he wouldn't have done the same if their roles were reversed, and he wasn't willing to overlook her betrayal. The next day was the 4th of July, a holiday the family had always celebrated together. Ray prepped marinated chicken, hamburgers, and hot dogs for the younger kids, eager to spend time with everyone. The barbecue went smoothly, with friends and family gathering. Josie looked radiant, laughing and smiling as if nothing had happened. Though Ray was still hurt by what he'd discovered, he considered forgiving her once, given their long marriage. As guests began to leave, Ray excused himself for a nap, wanting to rest before the evening fireworks. After a couple of hours, he woke feeling refreshed, ready to enjoy the night. He changed and went to the living room where his family sat around the table. Josie was at the far end, with his granddaughters Julia and Allison, Christine and her husband Eric, and his son Leo and wife Rebecca. The atmosphere felt heavy, and Ray realized they were staging an intervention. Christine spoke first. We need to talk about Mom. Ray glanced at Josie, her face unreadable, and then back at his daughter. What about Mom? She told us about Luke, Christine said. Ray was stunned. She told you? Yes, and about your issues, Christine confirmed. Ray stared at his wife, stunned that she had shared such personal details with their family. My problems? This doesn't concern any of you. But Mom's happiness does, Christine responded. Ray turned to Josie. Are you unhappy? I am happy, Ray. Please don't doubt that, Josie replied. Christine interrupted again. But Mom has needs, and well, you can't meet them, isn't that true? So I'm selfish for not accepting this? We're not labeling it that way, Dad. We're just saying you should support Mom taking care of things quietly, since you can't, Christine explained. Ray looked around the room, realizing his family seemed to accept, or at least tolerate, Josie's infidelity. He felt older and more defeated than ever. Do you all agree? Ray asked, searching their faces. They nodded, though some hesitated. He needed clarity. Leo, do you agree with this? Ray asked his son. Yes, it'll help Mom, Leo said. Eric? Ray turned to his son-in-law, expecting no disagreement. I don't see it being a big problem, Eric replied. Rebecca? Ray asked his daughter-in-law, who seemed to shy away. Well, as long as she's discreet, Rebecca said uncertainly. Finally, Ray turned to his granddaughters. They were part of a different generation, and he wasn't sure where they stood on this issue. What about you girls? Grandpa, we shouldn't be involved, Julia, the eldest, said. Come on, you're almost adults. I'm sure you have opinions, Ray pressed. Julia and Allison exchanged glances, then looked at their parents, who urged them to speak. Ray knew what was coming. They had been convinced to side with their grandmother. Well, a lot of our friends are fine with their partners seeing other people. It's just Zex, Julia finally said. It's just Zex. Ray had expected to hear this eventually. Josie had clearly manipulated everyone to get her way and keep her affair going. Realizing there was no point in arguing, Ray looked at Josie, who was watching him eagerly. "That's it, Josephine. Majority rules. You'll get what you want." Josie's face lit up with satisfaction. Ray turned to leave, but heard her call his name. For a moment, he hoped she might reconsider, but instead she asked, "Can I tell Luke you were joking about eliminating him?" "Sure, I'm going for a drive." "Dad, it's time for the fireworks," Leo reminded him. "Go without me. I don't want to go," Ray replied. As he left the house, he heard cheers behind him. Glancing through the window, he saw Josie being hugged by the family, united in their support of her affair. She was already calling Luke to confirm their next meeting, assuring him that Ray had backed down. The family piled into the car, chatting and laughing as they headed to the fireworks, confident Ray would come around. Meanwhile, Ray drove to a quiet hill overlooking the city, a place he often went to think. He was deeply hurt by his family's betrayal, feeling cast aside and useless. Their support of Josie's infidelity made him feel like an outsider, as if he had been discarded, much like the old stories of elders being abandoned when they were no longer seen as useful. All Ray wanted was to sleep, but napping during the day had its downsides. It was after midnight when he finally returned home. He saw that Christine's car was still there along with Josie's, but everyone else had left. As he approached, Josie opened the front door, likely alerted by the sound of his car alarm. "Where have you been? I was so worried," she said. Ray walked past her without responding. Christine sat on the sofa, looking at him curiously. "Why are you still here?" he asked. "Mom was worried when you didn't come back after the fireworks. Everyone else had to leave early, so I stayed." "You could have answered your phone," Christine replied. Ray glanced at his phone, remembering he'd turned it off earlier. "As you can see, I'm fine. You can go home." Christine was shocked. Her father was usually kind and polite, but this was different. She watched him head to his bedroom and shut the door. She grabbed her purse, kissed her mom goodbye, and left. By the time Josie finished cleaning, Ray was already asleep. The house remained quiet the following week. Josie knew Ray wasn't happy with her affair, but believed he would come to terms with it because he loved her. She was confident he would eventually forget or push it aside. For Ray, though, it felt like his life had crumbled. After decades of being a devoted family man, he was now cast aside by the very people he had prioritized. Josie's decision to involve the family in her affair marked the end of their marriage in his eyes. Their support of her betrayal shattered his sense of belonging in the family. Everything he had built was slipping away. On Saturday, Ray followed his routine and drove to the country club to meet his golf group. These were 8 older men who mixed up their foursomes weekly. Though Ray tried to focus on the game, he knew exactly what was happening at home. His performance wasn't the worst, but it was the worst he'd had in a while. Smiling through the light-hearted jokes felt nearly impossible. Josie watched Ray leave for golf at 7 a.m., hoping to show affection with a kiss, but he remained cold and distant. Though she hated hurting him, she pushed the thought aside. When Luke arrived, she had him parked down the street to avoid attracting attention. After he knocked, she let him in, wearing only a robe, which quickly ended up on the floor as they kissed passionately. Luke lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, where their encounter lasted about 2 hours. Afterward, Luke showered while Josie made the bed and started laundry. By the time Ray was expected home, everything was in order. When Ray didn't return by 2 o'clock, Josie became slightly concerned. By 3 o'clock, she started calling him, but all calls went to voicemail. By 5 o'clock, with still no word, her worry grew. By 7 o'clock, she called Christine for help. Soon, Christine, her husband Eric, and their daughters were at Josie's house. Eric went to the country club where he learned Ray had left hours earlier. Christine called the police, but they couldn't officially file a missing person report yet. With no way to reach Ray's golfing friends, the family was left to wait anxiously. Around 11 p.m., Julia saw headlights coming up the driveway. Sensing a confrontation, she and her sister went upstairs, while Eric, already asleep, stayed in Leo's old room. Only Josie and Christine remained to face Ray. Ray entered the house, unsurprised to see Josie waiting in the hallway and only mildly surprised to find Christine still there. He had seen her car outside but assumed she might leave them alone. Clearly, she was staying to support her mother. "Where have you been?" Josie snapped. "I was playing golf," Ray replied calmly. "Not afternoon, you weren't there anymore." "True. After golf, I had lunch at the clubhouse. Then I saw the new Dwayne Johnson movie. Not bad, a bit cliched, though." "I don't care about the details, Raymond," Josie shot back. "You asked where I was," Ray muttered. I want to know why you didn't come home and why you ignored your phone." "My phone didn't ring," Ray said, showing her it was off. "And I didn't come home because I didn't want to be here when your friend was—" Josie, frustrated, said, "Everything was cleaned up long before you finished golf. There was no reason for you to stay out all day." "As I said, I won't be here at the same time as your friend. It's late. I'm going to bed." Ray walked past Josie, briefly meeting Christine's gaze but saying nothing as he went to the bedroom. He expected one of them to follow, but neither did. As he got ready for bed, he overheard voices in the hallway and realized Christine's family was gathered in the house. Great, he thought. By the time Josie came to bed, Ray was already asleep, or pretending to be. She considered waking him to talk, but decided against it. The following weekend passed similarly. Josie neither called nor texted. She had accepted that Ray would be gone all day and used the time to thoroughly clean the house again. However, as the day dragged on, Josie started feeling uneasy being alone. So she called Christine, who agreed to come over and keep her company until Ray got back. Eric and the girls stayed home, but Christine came to support her mother. Ray arrived home around 11 p.m., surprised to see Christine's car parked at the curb again. He wondered if another confrontation was brewing. Walking through the door, he was greeted by Josie's warm smile and a kiss on the cheek, with Christine smiling in the background. "Why don't you change, love? Then you can tell me what you've been up to all day," Josie said softly, almost cheerfully. Ray was a bit confused. Josie seemed more relaxed than usual, her good mood intact. It didn't take him long to assume she'd had her usual meeting with Luke earlier in the day, which had left her in high spirits. Sighing, Ray went to the bedroom to change into his pajamas. When he returned to the living room, Christine was still there, seemingly waiting to speak to him before leaving. She hesitated for a moment and then said, "Dad, I know this is tough for you, but I just want to say how amazing it is that you show your love for Mom by letting her do this. It's really helped her." Ray stared at his daughter, shocked. "Letting her? Is that how you see it now?" He felt the weight of Christine's words sink in. They thought he was allowing it, as if he had given his approval for the affair. He couldn't believe the situation had reached this point. He realized they all believed he had accepted it. Looking at Christine, his voice heavy with resignation, he said, "I'm telling you now, Christine, this is the last conversation we'll have on this topic. The last. Make sure everyone knows." Christine, taken aback by her father's stern tone, nodded in understanding. "Of course, Dad, I get it. It's hard to forget if people keep bringing it up. I'll tell everyone." With that, she kissed him on the cheek and left. A moment later, Josie came in with drinks for both of them. Ray couldn't help but think Josie had planned for Christine to speak to him first. He drank his water in silence, watching Josie move around the room with her usual ease, seemingly unaware of the tension still gnawing at him. This pattern continued for months. Josie enjoyed her relationship with Luke, while Ray found new ways to occupy his time. He still played golf every Saturday morning and watched movies, but he began exploring other activities as well. He tried mini-golf, bowling, and even arcade games. He wasn't very good at them, but he had fun, finding some solace in these new distractions. At home, life settled into a routine, or at least what passed for normal. Luke was never mentioned. Every evening, Ray and Josie had dinner together and pleasant, if ordinary, conversations. Their closeness had shifted, but Josie, convinced her relationship with Luke didn't affect her marriage, continued showing love and affection toward Ray. If she noticed that Ray rarely reciprocated, she didn't mention it, perhaps too comfortable in the situation she had created. Maybe because Ray never brought up Luke, she believed he was more okay with it than he really was. Ray was in for a shock when Thanksgiving arrived. "Mom, Luke's here," Christine called from the front of the house. Ray, sitting in a chair reading the newspaper, froze. If he had been drinking something, he would have spat it out. His hands tightened around the paper as the words echoed in his head. "Oh, good," Josie said. "I wasn't sure he'd make it." Ray felt a surge of anger rise in him. He pressed the lever on the chair, lowering the footrest, and stood up, seething. "What the hell is he doing here?" he demanded, glaring at Josie. "I invited him for Thanksgiving," she replied calmly. "He doesn't have family in town, and he had nowhere to go. I told you I wouldn't be here at the same time as him. That's why I'm not around on Saturdays." Ray's voice trembled with rage. "And now you invite him to my house for a family holiday?" "This is my home too, Raymond. He's not here for Zex. It's just dinner. I expect you to behave," Josie said coldly, standing firm. Ray couldn't believe what he was hearing. Josie turned and walked to the front door to greet Luke, introducing him to their children, their spouses, and their granddaughters, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. She took Luke's hand and led him into the living room to meet Ray. But when they turned the corner, Ray was no longer there, or at least not in the chair where he had been moments before. Josie looked around, puzzled, before realizing he had left. She headed to the kitchen, hearing the garage door motor start. She arrived just in time to see the door lowering as Ray's car pulled out of the driveway. "Was that Dad who just left?" Christine asked, noticing the taillights disappear. "Yes, it was," Josie responded irritably, heading to her bedroom to gather her thoughts. Luke, looking uneasy, approached Christine. "Should I go? Maybe it'd be better if I left," he asked. "No, Luke, it's fine. This is my dad's problem, not yours. You're always welcome here." Luke hesitated, clearly not wanting to cause more trouble, but when Christine reassured him, he nodded and stayed. The family and Luke bonded over dinner, and despite the underlying tension, the evening went smoothly. Luke engaged with Leo and Eric, chatting about football while the women went shopping. No one noticed when Ray's car passed by later that night. By the time everyone returned from shopping, Leo and Eric had dozed off on the couch, and Ray was still gone. Concerned, Christine woke her husband and kids, sending them home, but she stayed behind to keep her mother company. Leo and Rebecca left, leaving the house quiet as Josie and Christine waited for Ray. Ray came home around midnight, hoping Josie had gone to bed by then, but as soon as he stepped inside, she was there waiting. "Where have you been all day?" she demanded, her voice sharp with frustration. "I went to Denny's for Thanksgiving dinner, then caught a few movies," Ray replied calmly. "We had a great meal right here, and you went to Denny's? Why would you do that?" "It's not about the food, Josephine. It's about the company." Josie's frustration peaked. "I can't believe a 64-year-old man can't be polite to a guest I invited into our home. I would never treat someone you invited like that." "I told you I wouldn't be in this house at the same time as him. That didn't just mean when he's here for Zex. I meant any time, and you knew that. Yet you did it anyway. It was just dinner, Ray. Maybe for you," Ray said, raising his newspaper between them, ending the conversation. After 5 minutes of silence, Christine knelt beside him, her voice soft, almost childlike. "Dad, please try to understand that he means a lot to her. She doesn't love him, but she cares about him. She didn't want him to be alone for the holiday." Ray sighed. "And you don't think there's a problem with Mom's friend becoming part of the family?" "He's not family, Dad. He's just a friend like anyone else." Ray realized the argument was over. "Of course, Christine. I understand." Christine looked relieved. "I hope so, Dad. See you later." She kissed him on the cheek and left. Josie didn't appear again that night. When Ray finally dragged himself to bed, Josie was already asleep. Thanksgiving marked a turning point in some ways. Displays of affection between Ray and Josie almost vanished. They lived more like neighbors than a married couple. Josie believed her decision to have a lover was justified by Ray's condition, viewing his reaction as selfish and driven by pride. Ray, however, saw it as the ultimate betrayal of their decades-long marriage. They only communicated when necessary, and the love that had sustained them for over 40 years had faded. When Josie mentioned needing to do last-minute shopping on Christmas Eve, Ray didn't say a word, although she hadn't needed to do that in years. He knew where she was going. He didn't have to follow her or check her phone. Her expression told him everything. Whether she planned to exchange gifts or something more, he wasn't sure, but he knew she would have a private celebration with Luke on New Year's Eve. Ray kissed his wife at midnight, though without the passion of past years. Josie felt disappointed she couldn't express her feelings to Luke, but she still called him the next day to wish him a happy new year. With Valentine's Day approaching, Ray planned a nice dinner at a fancy seafood restaurant, and Josie looked forward to it, thinking maybe her husband was coming back to her. But Ray had lingering suspicions. Josie's desire to spend holidays with her lover made him suspicious about Valentine's Day. He doubted she'd let the day pass without seeing Luke. So Ray left the office for a bit to watch the house. He parked at the end of the street with a clear view of the front door. Sure enough, Luke parked around the corner and walked to the house. Ray half expected him to walk right in, but instead Luke knocked, and Josie let him in. Ray doubted they were just going to talk. It was their personal Valentine's Day celebration. Apparently, they weren't just casual lovers anymore. That evening's dinner was subdued. Josie approached Ray with hope, thinking they might rekindle their relationship, but the good mood he'd shown over the past few days was gone. Josie was disappointed but tried to make the best of it, wondering what had changed. With no small children around, Easter was just an excuse for a big family dinner. They hid a few large plastic eggs in the yard, usually containing gift cards or something similar. It was just for fun and to get into the holiday spirit. To Ray's relief, Luke wasn't invited. Josie had at least respected that after the Thanksgiving disaster. But Ray knew she met him on days other than Saturday mornings, maybe more often than he realized. She had done it for Valentine's Day, and she could easily do it on other days as well. After the morning festivities ended, Ray announced he was going to lie down. While he was a little tired, it was nothing he couldn't handle. He mainly wanted to avoid being around the family that had betrayed him. He couldn't avoid them completely, but he could limit his time with them. It was a beautiful day, so he opened a window overlooking the backyard, letting a cool breeze in. Unfortunately, he also overheard Josie and Christine's conversation. "So, how's Luke doing?" he heard Christine ask. "Shh, not too loud. I don't want your father to hear." Okay, Christine replied, lowering her voice, but still loud enough for Ray to hear. "I just can't believe my mom has a boyfriend 10 years younger than me." "He's not my boyfriend, Christine. Come on, Mom. You sleep with him 2-3 times a week, and you both go out to dinner. You might not want to call him your boyfriend, but that's what he is." Okay, he's my boyfriend. I just want to be considerate of your father's feelings." "I know, Mom. I love Dad too, and I don't want him to get hurt. But let's be honest. He's an old man, and you're still young." "He's only 5 years older than me, Christine." "In actual age, yes. But you're active, and he can barely get through the day without a nap. You deserve this. Honestly, I'm a little jealous you're dating again." "Does anyone else know? I mean, other than Saturday mornings, Leo, Eric, Rebecca?" "No, I don't involve them." "Does everyone agree with this?" "Leo and Eric think it's fine. They agree that I should meet my needs since Dad can't anymore. Rebecca's the only one who thinks it's wrong, but she doesn't want to hurt Dad, so she won't say anything. What Dad doesn't know won't hurt him." Hearing how deep Josie's betrayal ran, and how Christine fully supported her mother's affair, Ray felt the last bits of love and affection for them leave his heart. Though he had made tentative plans before, out of love for his family and his long marriage to Josie, he had held back. Now, it was time to begin his final plans in earnest. Ray quietly closed the window and lay down. Over the next few months, Ray's relationships with Josie and Christine deteriorated further. Things weren't much better with his sons and son-in-law, but he tried to improve things with Rebecca and his granddaughters, believing they were too young to fully understand the situation. Mother's Day had its own traditions in Ray's family. For them, it meant brunch at an upscale French-themed restaurant. The food and service were excellent, with prices to match. When the kids were younger, Ray used to take the family out to celebrate with Josie. As the kids grew up and started working, they took over the tradition, doing the same for Father's Day. The family had an unusual arrangement. The other parent didn't attend the celebration. Years ago, Ray stopped going to Mother's Day, and Josie stopped attending Father's Day. The kids celebrated with each parent separately, and Ray had always been fine with that until this year. He had a feeling, based on recent events, that something wasn't right. So instead of spending his usual free time reading, Ray dressed and headed to the restaurant. Josie had been gone about 30 minutes, so he knew she'd be there. He didn't plan on participating or even letting anyone know he was there. In fact, he doubted he'd even have to get out of the car. He drove around the parking lot, easily spotting Christine and Eric's car, then Josie's car, followed by Leo and Rebecca's. Ray began to hope he was wrong, but then he saw what he had feared. Tucked away in a corner parking spot, Luke's car. Ray had seen it enough times to recognize the license plate. His wife, or maybe his daughter, had invited her lover to a family event, fully knowing Ray wouldn't be there. Despite all that had happened, and despite Ray's fading love for Josie, this new betrayal filled him with rage. Any plans to temper his actions vanished. Ray returned home, grabbed his golf clubs, and headed to the local course. He went through several buckets of balls, losing count. By the end, he was exhausted. His shots weren't very far or accurate, but he felt better. He drove home ready for a nap. They considered him useless, thinking he couldn't get through a day without rest. He'd let them continue to think that. Josie greeted him when he walked in. He wondered if she had a private celebration planned with Luke, though he no longer cared. It still hurt, but it wasn't worth worrying about anymore. As he walked through the door, he wondered if she'd admit to inviting Luke if given the chance. "How was Mother's Day with your family?" Ray asked, putting slight emphasis on family. "It was wonderful, Ray. "Thanks for asking. I had a great time with the kids," Josie replied. She didn't mention Luke. Did this mean the family now considered him part of it? Or had she just decided not to mention him? Ray realized he would never know. He went to the bedroom and took a nap. Soon, the 4th of July came around again. Josie was in a good mood, and Ray knew why. He had stayed by her side for nearly a year now, and Josie undoubtedly thought she had it all figured out. She had a husband who supported her, and a younger man she met with several times a week. In her mind, her life was nearly perfect. Luke had started a new evening job, allowing him to spend a few half-days a week with Josie. Though the pay wasn't much, that wasn't why she was with him. To avoid rubbing it in Ray's face, they mostly stayed out of Josie's bedroom, except for their Saturday matinees. They used Luke's apartment or borrowed a friend's place when necessary, since Luke had roommates. The hardest part for Josie was excluding Luke from family events. She didn't bring it up with Ray again, knowing he wouldn't change his mind, and that was the only thing that really upset her. At first, and even now, she hoped Ray and Luke could at least become acquaintances, if not friends. In her view, they weren't competing. Luke gave her one thing and Ray gave her another, so she spent her days with Luke and evenings and weekends with Ray. She didn't understand why it couldn't work, so reluctantly, she didn't invite Luke to the family barbecue and fireworks outing. The family arrived early to help with meal preparations, and Ray made sure to stay visible and active, ensuring no one could doubt later that he was tired. He carefully watched the crowd, wondering if Josie might sneak Luke in, but he never showed up. As the day wore on, Ray pretended to get more tired. Although some of it was real, much of it was exaggerated. Maybe he overdid it, as Josie seemed to notice and approached him. "Honey, why don't you lie down and relax before the fireworks?" she suggested gently. The hardest part of all this for Ray was knowing Josie still loved and cared about him, which made what he was about to do even tougher. "I'm not going to the fireworks. I just want to enjoy the day with my family and head to bed early." "Ray, are you sure? You missed them last year. But before that, you always loved going," Josie said, genuinely concerned. "Yeah, I'm sure. I guess I'm just getting old, but everyone else will have a great time without me." "Okay, if you're sure." As soon as she left him, Ray watched her weave through the crowd and searching for Christine. He realized Josie was trying to confirm if he would attend the fireworks because she planned to invite Luke. Even though it didn't change anything, the fresh betrayal stung deeply. As the evening progressed, most guests left, leaving only family. Josie, Christine, Leo, and Eric all stopped by to ask Ray again if he wanted to join them for the fireworks, expressing how much they'd miss him. Ray saw through it, realizing his family was slipping away from him. As they prepared to leave, he swallowed his anger and said a few words to each family member. Despite the past year, he cherished the memories of their time together and would miss those moments. He hugged his granddaughters the longest. Ray watched with a heavy heart as the family piled into Christine's minivan, laughing and happy, not even noticing his absence. He tried to push them from his mind and focused on his next steps. The family returned later than usual, giving Josie time alone with Luke. Luke thanked them for including him, especially since he had no close family nearby. Although only Josie spent much time with him, the family had come to accept him as part of their extended circle and appreciated how happy he made Josie. They said their goodbyes at the park since he couldn't come back to the house. When the family got home, they tried to be quiet so as not to disturb Ray. They poured drinks and sat around the dining room table to chat for 30 to 45 minutes before Josie suddenly remembered Ray and asked Leo to check on him. Leo got up and slowly walked into the bedroom. He didn't find Ray asleep, but noticed the bedspread pulled back, revealing the snow-white sheets Josie always insisted on. On the bed, he saw Ray's wedding ring and a flash drive. This wasn't a good sign. "He's not there," Leo said when he returned. "What do you mean he's not there?" Josie asked. "He's gone, Mom. No one's been in the bed, and I found this on the sheets," Leo replied, holding up the ring and flash drive. Not fully believing it, Josie rushed to the bedroom and saw for herself that the bed was unused. When she returned to the living room, Eric was already connecting the flash drive to the laptop. The drive contained only one large file. Josie nodded to Eric and he double-clicked it. The The video began playing, and at first they saw a blank wall but heard voices. Moments later, Ray appeared on camera. "Is it recording?" Ray asked someone off screen. "Yes," a woman's voice replied. Ray turned to the camera. "Good evening, everyone. If I've timed this right, you're watching this a little after 10 p.m., just back from the fireworks show." Everyone reflexively looked at the clock and saw it was nearly 11 p.m. They hadn't bothered to check on Ray when they got home. "At this moment, I'm on a plane flying far beyond the borders of the United States. In case you're wondering, I won't be coming back." "No," Josie cried, breaking into tears. "You betrayed me." The video continued. "Each of you, my wife, who had my love and support for over 40 years, never having to work a day outside of raising our children, threw me aside like trash for a man half my age. And when I dared to object, you turned the whole family against me. I thought 40 years of loyalty, dedication, faithfulness, and support would mean something to you, Josephine. I deserved better, your desires, and let's be honest, they were wants, not needs, should have taken a back seat to my feelings. Doing this behind my back was bad enough, but forcing the family to side with you was even worse. That day felt like 7 knives stabbed into my heart. Christine, your betrayal hurt just as much as your mother's. Growing up, you were always Daddy's girl. We did everything together. Knowing that you supported your mother in cheating on me, your own father, broke my heart more than anything she did." "I didn't say that," Christine exclaimed. "Never." Ray's voice pressed on in the video. "Leo, Eric, you two must be the biggest idiots in the world. Do you even realize that by supporting this, you gave your wives permission to cheat on you? Leo, I don't think Rebecca would do this, but after what I've heard from Christine, you should be concerned. Eric, if Christine ever claims you're not satisfying her, she'll walk away. She's already told her mother how jealous she is." Eric looked over at Christine, who shook her head as Ray's words echoed through the room. "No, baby, I never said that. I would never do that," Christine protested. Ray's voice didn't waver. "And what about you, Eric? You can't really object to what's happening, can you? You've already said it's normal for Josie. Or is it only normal because it wasn't happening to you? What will happen when it's your turn?" Christine will deny she'd ever do such a thing, but ask her if she thinks it would be wrong for her. Why was it okay for her mother? Her answer will tell you everything. Eric paused the video and looked at his wife. "You said you were jealous of your mom?" "I don't remember exactly what I said. I just meant I was glad she was experiencing a new relationship and rediscovering herself." "So, do you want to rediscover yourself with someone else?" Eric asked. "No, baby. Please don't blow this out of proportion. I love you and don't want to be with anyone else. Unless I can't perform anymore, right? Honey, can we discuss this later? We need to focus on Mom right now." Ray's voice from the video cut through their conversation. "But this isn't over yet." Eric pressed play again and Ray's voice filled the room. "I didn't want to stay in a marriage where my wife cheated on me every week. I certainly wasn't going to stick around when I found out it was happening several times a week. Sorry, Josephine, but you weren't nearly as discreet as you thought. Inviting him to Mother's Day? That was tasteless. I won't tell you where I've gone, but even if you find me, there's nothing you can do about it." Everyone in the room sat in silence, tension thick in the air, as Ray continued. "I should also mention the financial situation I left you with. I took most of our money because I intend to live the rest of my life in comfort, as a reward for putting everyone else first for decades. Josephine, I left you the house, which, as you know, is fully paid off and worth several $100,000. My lawyer will help you with the sale if you want. I also left $400,000 in the bank. That's $10,000 for every good year you gave me. Unfortunately, there haven't been any loans of goodwill in the last year. Don't worry about me. After taking the rest of our assets, including the investments, I'm sitting on nearly 8 figures. I'll be just fine, though I doubt any of you really care. The way I've been treated over the past year shows how you all truly feel about me." Everyone exchanged uneasy glances but remained silent. "Oh, and if you're worried I'll spend my golden years alone, don't be. I already have a companion, and she's sitting next to me on the plane right now. Let me introduce her. Deborah." A woman's face appeared in the frame, matching the female voice from earlier. "Hello, I'm Deborah. I'll be helping Ray spend what could have been your inheritance, she said, waving at the camera. She appeared to be in her mid-50s, an attractive brunette. Ray smiled at the camera before continuing. Deborah and I have been keeping each other company for the past 4 or 5 months, ever since I told her what my wife was doing. We've been spending a lot of time together and discovered how compatible we are. Josephine, you probably remember Deborah. You've met her several times. We worked together for over 30 years, since she was hired in the marketing department. She took early retirement to join me at my new home. We've been close friends all this time, and the best part? Deborah's needs are simple. Just affection, hugs, kisses, and maybe a few other things. I'm looking forward to it. Everyone in the room looked at Josie, gauging her reaction to Ray's revelation. It was clear from her expression that she wasn't taking it well. Eric paused the video. "Mom, are you okay?" Leo asked. "No, Leo, I'm definitely not okay. But let's just finish this," she replied. Eric resumed the video, and Ray's voice grew more somber as he addressed Josie directly. "Josephine, I loved you from the day we met. If anyone had told me you could treat me like this, I would have knocked them out before they could finish. I looked forward to spending our final years together with visits from our children and grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren. I'm so disappointed that your physical desires ruined that for us, for me. I hope it was worth it for you. You should have enough money to live comfortably, especially if you sell the house. If you need more, I'm sure the children who supported your romance will support you financially as well. After all, it was my money that got them through college and into their good jobs, so I had a lot to do with that." The tension in the room thickened as Ray's voice continued. "It was a terrible year, and things kept getting worse. I knew about the extra time you spend with him each week. I could have ended this months ago, but I liked the idea of declaring my independence on Independence Day, so I waited. Part of me will always love you, or at least what we had. I wish things were different, but somewhere along the way, you forgot that marriage is about us, not just you and me. I never made decisions that would benefit me and hurt you, unlike what you did with Luke. You probably thought I'd come to terms with it, maybe because I always sacrificed for you. But it doesn't matter now. It's done and can't be undone. For your sake, I hope it was worth it. Goodbye, Josephine. I'll miss you and what we could have had." Ray looked directly at the camera, and the screen went black. Everyone in the room was in tears, some more than others. None of them had expected Josie and Luke's relationship to drive Ray away. In the past, Ray had always conceded to Josie's wishes, and they assumed this time would be no different. Deep down, no one believed Ray had the guts to do anything but accept it. Tired and shaken, they all decided to stay overnight at Josie's house to support her. Rebecca was cleaning the kitchen when the phone rang. She usually only got calls from her husband Leo or the occasional telemarketer. The number was blocked, which struck her as odd, but she decided to answer. "Hello," Rebecca answered the phone. "Rebecca, it's Ray," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Oh God, Ray, how are you? Where are you?" Rebecca asked, concern clear in her voice. "I'm fine, Rebecca. Really, I am. But I can't tell you where I am right now. How are you?" Ray deflected. "I'm fine, Dad. I have news. I'm pregnant," Rebecca shared. "Congratulations. How far along are you?" Ray asked, the warmth evident. "Just a couple of months. We found out right after you left." "I can't believe it's been almost 3 weeks since you've been gone," Rebecca replied, her voice softening. "Yes, time flies. By the way, thanks for calling me Dad. I thought I'd lost that title," Ray said, gratitude in his tone. "Not with me, you haven't," Rebecca reassured him. "You know, Dad, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up when everyone confronted you. It was wrong, but I was new to the family and scared," Rebecca admitted, her voice wavering slightly. "I had a feeling, but honestly, it wouldn't have changed anything. Josie and Christine were determined to push through with it." "You're forgiven," Ray said calmly. "Thank you, Dad. That means so much, especially because I want both grandfathers in my baby's life." "Will you be part of it?" Rebecca asked hopefully. "We'll see. I'm not coming back to the States, but maybe we can work something out." "I'd love to see you and the baby," Ray responded. "So, how are things over there?" Rebecca inquired. In a word, tense, Ray sighed. Josie isn't herself most of the time, though she still sees Luke several times a week. Christine and Eric are having problems, but they're keeping it under wraps. I think your comment about Christine looking for an excuse to cheat hit a nerve. How are you and Leo? Rebecca switched topics. We're fine. Still in the early stages of marriage, so it's fresh. Christine and Eric have been together longer, so maybe that makes them more cautious, Ray said. The granddaughters are devastated, though, Rebecca added. That surprises me. You've always been close with them, Ray responded, surprised. They miss spending time with you. They don't think casual sex is a big deal, but they understand it's different when you're married, Rebecca explained. I get it. Christine's influence is clear in their reactions, Ray acknowledged. Listen, could you gather everyone at your place tonight? I think I'm ready to talk. I don't think that'll be a problem, Dad, Rebecca agreed. Then we'll talk later, Ray concluded. That evening, the entire family gathered in Leo and Rebecca's living room. Rebecca had made it clear that Luke wasn't invited. Though she prepared sandwiches, the tension in the air left everyone too preoccupied to eat. At exactly 8 o'clock, the phone rang. Rebecca placed it on speaker. Hi, Dad. Everyone's here, Rebecca announced. Thanks, honey. Just so you all know, Deborah is with me. Let's try to have a polite conversation, not an argument. Does everyone agree? Ray asked. The family members murmured their agreement. Good. I wanted to wait until some time had passed before we talked. I contacted Rebecca first because I sensed she wasn't as comfortable with all of this as the rest of you. Leo, congratulations on the baby, Ray started. Thanks, Dad. I'll try to live up to the standards of fatherhood you set. And I mean that, Leo replied. As they say, the best thing you can do for your children is to love their mother. Keep that in mind, and you'll do great, Ray advised. Ray then addressed his granddaughters. Allison? Julia? Yes, Grandpa, they responded together. Girls, I was disappointed you sided with your grandmother, but your aunts Rebecca and Deborah convinced me that you may have been pressured and didn't fully understand. You lack the life experience to comprehend the complexities of adulthood and a 40-year marriage. I still have your emails and phone numbers, so we can talk more about this later if that's okay. Of course, Grandpa. We just miss you, Allison replied. I miss you too. Why don't you both find something to do while the adults talk? Ray suggested. The girls hugged their grandmother and said goodbye before leaving the room. So, Ray continued, does anyone have something they're dying to say? Ray, honey, please, Josie began, unsurprising to everyone. Please come back. We can work through this. If you had told me you were really leaving, we could have fixed it. Why did it have to go this far, Josephine? I told you I wouldn't accept this, but you turned to the family for support. You started inviting him to family events and seeing him multiple times a week. You replaced me with him when we were barely even roommates. I finally had enough. But you didn't say anything else. I thought you had accepted it. Thought it was just something I did, Josie said, her voice shaking. Ray looked at her, his tone firm. It drove a wedge into our marriage, and there was no way out but this. From the moment you chose him over me, our marriage was doomed. I'm so sorry, Ray. Can't we? Josie began, her voice filled with desperation. No, Josephine, we can't, Ray interrupted. Even if I wanted to, and I don't, I've made a commitment to Deborah, and I intend to keep it. What about your commitment to me? You made that one first, Josie pressed, tears welling up. Yes, I did. And I would still be honoring it if you hadn't broken yours. But when you did, it freed me from mine and gave me the chance to make a new one, which I have, Ray responded. The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound being Josie's soft sobs. Josie, Ray said gently, I'm sorry, but there's no point in continuing this. Whether you meant to or not, you pushed me away. There's no turning back. Without another word, Josie stood and quietly left the room, heading towards Christine and Eric's bedroom. Christine, watching her mother leave, spoke up, her voice cold. Very nice, Daddy. Did you call just to hurt Mom and make her cry? All because your ego couldn't handle another man making her feel better? Ray, unfazed, responded, Is that really how you see it, Christine? Eric, how's your ego holding up? Is it ready to accept another man making your wife feel better than you? Christine glanced at Eric, who remained silent. Throughout their marriage, Christine had always been the dominant partner, and Eric, like many husbands, had gone along with it. But recently there had been a shift, and Christine realized that their marriage was now in serious trouble. You can't support another woman's right to cheat without feeling at least a little guilt. Ray's words echoed in her mind. Her tone softened. No, Ray, that's not fair. You were right. I hadn't thought about it that way, she admitted quietly. For what it's worth, Ray, after all of this, Christine and I have been having serious issues, Eric finally spoke, breaking his silence. I understand, Ray replied, but let me tell you this. Fight for your marriage before it's too late. You two love each other, but you've started taking that for granted. I noticed it before all of this happened. Let this be a wake-up call, not the end. Remember, you're a team. Christine lowered her head. I never meant for this to happen, Dad, she whispered, her voice heavy with guilt. I know, but Christine, Josie didn't do this alone, Ray said, his tone calm but firm. The room went quiet again, the weight of Ray's words hanging in the air. After a few moments, Christine spoke once more, her voice small, almost like a child's. Dad, can I talk to you alone? If everyone else doesn't mind, I don't either, Ray replied. Christine glanced around the room, and seeing no objections, she took the phone and retreated to a spare room, closing the door behind her. Dad, I'm scared, Christine confessed. Eric is talking about divorce, or at least counseling. What should I do? You can fix this, Christine. Here's what you'll do. Now that your daughters are mostly grown, put the time you used to spend raising them back into your marriage. This isn't free time, like your mother thought. You're his partner, not his boss, Ray advised. Christine's voice trembled. He's really angry, Dad. Ever since he started seeing this as me giving myself permission to cheat, he's been furious. He's constantly snapping at me, and I know he wonders if I've already done something. Ray's voice remained steady. Did you? No, Daddy, no, Christine answered quickly. But I don't know how to convince him. All you can do is make sure there's no reason for suspicion moving forward. If you stay honest, questions about the past will eventually fade, Ray assured her. Christine hesitated. Dad, I'm really sorry. Isn't there any way to fix things between you and Mom? It's too late for us, honey, but it's not too late for you, Ray said softly. Christine's voice cracked as she whispered, Daddy, I love you. I love you too, Ray replied.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My breath was ragged in my throat, pain laced across my back and neck, and I couldn't see straight. My vision swam as I fought for breath. I gulped in fresh air and lay there, so exhausted I couldn't move. There was nothing I could do, for a while at least. Maybe I could get strength enough to move. My thoughts wandered to her, and where this had all started, where everything had changed. She was fragile, tears made of dewed crystal, ready to fall at any moment. I couldn't touch her. He had done that. I didn't know if she wanted me to. I ached to touch her, to bury her tears in my shoulder and make her smile again. Her eyes were broken, shattered in pain and loss of innocence, a betrayal of trust one could never heal. I watched her shoulders shake with something I couldn't stop. Her grief, her sickened, betrayed soul. Mary sat in front of me, 15 years old. I was her best friend, her only true friend. Her others dumped her in an instant the second she needed them. Because she needed her privacy. I hated them for that. We sat by the river we'd both played in as children. Her tears didn't stop, and I couldn't halt them. There was pain and anger etched in the stone of my face. But when Mary looked up, I held only concern for her. For as long as we could remember, I was her knight in shining armor. When the boys picked on her, I'd make them stop. When she couldn't stand it at home anymore, I was always able to sway Mum to let it slide and provide a pillow. I was in love with her. Always had been. I felt wretched and wrenched between hatred, anger, anguish, and sorrow. My guts ached with clenching them in. Mary's head rose, and her reddened cheek shined in the waning sunlight. I looked away, and she stared at me. I felt my rage building, but buried it. I needed to be strong for Mare. It was like he didn't even consider it to be wrong. He's my father. For God's sake. He's not supposed to. I shushed her as her lips trembled, and I wanted to hit something. I reached out without thinking, and she flinched. I felt it like a knife slamming into my gut. I had frightened her. I shut my eyes and let my hands drop. There was silence for a moment, and I stood up. You can stay with us. It's settled. I opened my eyes, but Mary was still on the ground. her rich auburn hair shining like vibrant red gold in the last flickers of sunlight. The intense flicker of the sunlight off the dancing wavelets of the river shone in a brief sparkle of brilliance before they faded. As the darkness began to fall, Mary shivered. I shook my shoulders out of my jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Her cheek lowered and she sighed. She reached a hand up to let me help her up, and I pulled her up towards me. I could feel her hand trembling, and I let go as soon as she was on her feet. I felt the darkness building in me, and I smiled weakly at her. We walked slowly back up the trail towards my house. There was a slight, warm breeze, calming me with the scent of the sun-warmed river. I felt her pull away from me, an emaciated kid with bony, oversized hands and dark brown hair that kept falling across gray eyes almost constantly unless held under a cap. I terrified her, and her father had done it. He'd taken away even what comfort I could give her. I felt useless, completely without aid from my friend in her darkest moments. We walked without speaking or touching, feeling the evening lose its warmth as the fog and mist began to descend. Mum met us at the door, a warm smile and a hug for Mary. Mary broke down again and began to cry. I felt myself ache for her, and my face screwed up. I turned back without a word and left. I began to jog, moving down off the road and further away. I heard the thunder, but didn't pay any attention to it. The fog began to move away, and the stars blinked out as thunderheads rolled in like harbingers of doom. I was outside of Mary's place before I realized what I was doing. The rain began to come down, softly at first. I lifted my head up, feeling the cold drops cascade over me. Calmness began, finally, to seep inside me, as though the rain, drop by drop, was washing away my anger. I heard faint popping sounds, the metal rattle of tin cans being pelted with stones or something. There was a sudden curse, and then silence for a moment. I heard a familiar dry squeal of metal as the old, rusted hinges on Mary's screen door swung wide. I heard heavy footsteps and could almost see the steps of the one person in the world I actually hated. There was a grunt of surprise, like something a man says when he sees something he isn't expecting. Where's the witch? Little Witch always brings the pipsqueak as her bodyguard. There was a meaty heave and wheeze as Mary's father laughed at his own hilarity, and I opened my eyes. There was another grunt of surprise, like the kind an animal makes when its instinct warns of danger suddenly. I shook my head at him and felt my hands begin to shake. He shook his head. I don't even remember his face. I can never remember his face. I hit him. Once. As hard as I could. He fell back a few steps, clutching at his throat. I remember the rage on his face. The pure hatred. That I should so dare to strike him. There was a thick, greasy grin on his face as he coughed and reached around behind him. The gun was huge. I've no idea what sort it was. Some sort of revolver with bullets the size of Ohio. I felt the bullet hit my shoulder, but I didn't feel anything else. There was no pain, no nothing. I looked down, at the blood beginning to stain my shirt. I looked back up in time to see the butt of the gun smash into my eye socket. Blindness followed, but still no pain. My hands moved forwards, fighting for a hold on the gun. I just watched, detached from it all, as I slammed my hand into his elbow, smashing it out of its socket. The gun dropped to the floor, and I blinked away the blood that was clouding me. Mary's father was on his knees, his face going blue as I choked him. My hand was wrapped around his throat, choking him as he gasped for breath. I heard sirens in the distance and someone screaming, a high pitch, like a small animal's. It was Mary's father, gibbering in fear as his pants soiled in his terror. I blinked as the blood came into my eyes again, and I felt my soul wrenching in two as Mary's pain tore into me. I heard something, a car door, or something, and felt my own hot tears on my cheek. Someone grabbed hold of my arm and tried to move it, but my arm wouldn't move. I turned my head and saw someone, a cop, shaking his head and talking strangely. He was speaking, but I couldn't understand his words. The cop was shaking his head and talking soothingly, and I smiled. I could still feel the tears on my face and blinked as the blood eased its pounding in my ears. I felt whatever was rushing through me slow, and felt the rain as it hit my face, easing the raw redness of my eyes with cool drops. I swallowed as the officer gently pulled my hands behind me and felt Mary's father slide from my grip. My head, feeling like packed wool, tilted to the side. My voice sounded quiet to me, and I know I barely whispered. I also know he heard every word. Don't ever let me hear you've touched her again. I'll kill you. I'll just end you. Just like that. I barely remember the trial, or the conviction. 8 years. My actions and obvious lack of rational thought and reactions when the police arrived convinced the judge and jury that I was not myself at the time. And the fact that half the jury members, while overwhelmed by the evidence that I had committed the act, didn't know whether they would have done something different in my place. The first 6 months were hard. They were really hard. Mary's letters were the only things that I lived for. She was growing from an awkward young girl into a young woman, obviously pretending that everything was fine. Her letters lost their innocent sound, I guess echoing mine. The first time I was bashed was almost 2 days after I went in. A group of guys who liked to dominate other guys found out why I was there, and took it as an invitation to explain to me that there were those who lived by different rules. I tried to find that rage that Mary's father brought out in me, but it just wasn't there. Mary was safe. There was no need for it. The punches landed, but I felt nothing. I knew there was something wrong with me. I missed her. I had sacrificed everything for her. My freedom, my health. I hadn't even gotten a chance to see her. What I would have given to see her smile just once more. When I was in the infirmary, waiting to be treated, one of the old crims on janitor duty stopped by for a talk. He had heard about who and why, and wanted to meet the who. Murderer, battery, assault, armed robbery. Oh, and jaywalking. There was the list that Franklin Marsh had stacked up on the outside. 2 more accounts of assault inside, self-defense. Supposedly self-defense. He had a very philosophical view of life for a man serving a life sentence, and then some. His knuckles were scarred and swollen from arthritis and years of fights. He had the optional boxers and brawlers trademarks of the cauliflower ears and pug nose. But his eyes were clear, and his voice was calm. And he was the first person to actually tell me he thought I had done the right thing. Not much of a recommendation, I'll grant, but he was the man inside. He was the man inside. Once I got out of the infirmary, I met up with him in the yard. At 68, the man stood like a monolith in time, looking harder than most guys ever will. He smiled at me and I shook his hand. There was a murmur through the yard, and I wasn't touched from that day forwards. Frankie looked me up and down, and there came a small smile again. You ever box, kid? Ever work out? I shook my head, and he smiled that tiny little smile again. Over the next few months, well, years, I worked out. I built up some muscle. 2 years into my stretch, Frankie began to teach me economics. Where the hell he'd learned all that sort of stuff, I'll never know. I discovered a talent for writing, and began to write a very low-key story about characters that change and discover things about themselves they never knew. I didn't mention prison. I wasn't in there for a stretch long enough to know about it. When I'd spent half my life at age 70, then I'd maybe write something about prison. But change was something everyone goes through. I just put it into characters instead of myself. I also found something strange that I never knew. In wood shop, I learnt the turning and curve of wood, its simple molding into something beautiful to the eye, as opposed to the soul. You look at a tree and see the beauty of its creation and try to recapture that. Sales from my wood sculpting helped to keep my head above total despair when Mary's letters stopped. Not that she sent me money. She made me feel as though I could do something with myself. When her letters stopped, the only thing that made me feel as though I was worth something was the rich community clamoring for my artwork. Frankie didn't say much, but I knew he had asked a couple of his friends to keep an eye on me. But I wasn't going to kill myself. I had to get out. Fastest and easiest way to do that was to behave myself, keep my head down. I kept going with my sculpting, and on my 22nd birthday, I gave Frankie a present. It was a small wooden wren, a sculpting of the kind that always took his attention from whatever he was doing. Freebirds, he called them. Frankie stared at it for a long time and put his weathered old hand over mine. Thank you, son. Thank you. That was the last time I ever saw Frankie. Thinking he was over the hill and no longer worthy of the respect he damned well deserved. The guys who once thought me a plaything punching bag rounded him up in the laundry room. Frankie killed 6 of them before copping a shiv through the back, down into a lung. He seriously injured the guy who did it, Mitchell Roberts, leader of the so-called bad boys. Mr. Originality, that's for sure. When Mitch got better, the whole yard knew I was walking around with a target on my back. They tried to corral me in a secluded little spot in the west quarter of the yard. Too close for the tower guards to see, and the others all had their attention focused more on the center of the yard. I was ready. Mitch threw the first punch, and I caught it in my open hand. There was something intensely gratifying when it stopped his momentum cold. My muscles held, and I began to squeeze. Mitch stared in horror as the sound of his bones breaking brought attention towards us. I let go and he slumped down, holding his hand in pain. I didn't smile. I never smiled anymore. The others began to circle, and I moved around, keeping them in my sight. One tried a lunge, but met my elbow. He went down. 5 left. I felt something slam into my back, and broad arms clasped in front of me around my ribs and began to squeeze as I was lifted off the ground. I reached back over my head, kicking out wildly. I felt my foot connect with something as I fell backwards, wrenching my hands down across my shoulder and jarring someone's chin. The arm's let go and I rolled off, throwing dirt into the man's face. There was a heavy moan as someone hit the dirt, and I had time to see Mitch, his eyes wide with pain and sensation as his one good hand cupped his kicked balls. A fist smashed into the back of my head, and I lashed a leg out as I fell, taking someone off their feet. Blood flowed freely when he hit the dirt. He didn't move, and I watched the 3 remaining. Mitch was laying on the ground, gasping like a wounded goldfish, and was no threat. A kick punched out from my right, and I snagged it in my left hand, bringing my elbow down across the side of the guy's knee, dropping him down. I straightened as I watched the 2 still standing. I was settling into a rhythm, and they knew it. They backed down and ran. As whistles began to sound, the guards began to move around us, and I held my hands onto the back of my head, and he smiled at me, laughing under his breath. I was back in my cell before I knew it. There was a piece of paper on my bed. Open mail. I rushed to it, ripped the envelope apart in my haste, then saw the official print and knew it wasn't what I hoped for. At least not what I expected. I was to appear before the parole board for early release. Good behavior. There was a sound at my cell door, and I turned and stood straight as the warden stepped up to the open door. There were several guards at the bars, waiting for me to grow tired of living. Well, Alec, your day has come at long last. I thought we could have a little talk before you left. I nodded and sat down. If you want, sir. Have I done something wrong? Warden Jeremy Jones was a little older than me, at 46. He had 3 kids, 2 daughters and a son. His wife was a former customs officer who now ran one of the largest industrial chemical production factories in the country. We had barely spoken to one another in my tenure, other than his murmured condolences after Frankie had died when he stopped in the hall I was cleaning. If you'd done something wrong, son, you wouldn't be up for parole, now would you? I wanted to talk to you about something else. 2 something elses, actually. I nodded and the warden began to move around my cell. It didn't take him long. You've barely made a ripple since you came here with us. That's good. The kind of personage we need to see more of. Rationality-wise, of course. Technically, I'm sure we could all say we'd rather be out of our jobs. But that's really ideological bullshit. Now, son, you could have killed those idiots very easily. I've seen you training down there with Frankie, God rest his soul, and you have become dangerous. This is what troubles me. You've turned into a fighter in here, Kane. He frowned. Alec, look. Outside, you were Alec Kane, barely out of school runt with a protective streak who snapped. Inside, you've really grown, but you've more of a chance to do something now. You're educated, thanks to our schooling. You're dangerous, thanks to Frankie's. And you're violent, thanks to the other incarcerates. What will you be outside? You can speak freely now, Alec, just tell me. I thought about it for a while, then cleared my throat. I've learned a lot here, sir, that's true, I answered slowly. But the main thing I'll take with me is something Frankie taught me, that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And it's the deciding of that choice that makes free men into jailed wrecks. I could have killed them, you're right. But Frankie knew the difference, and despite the fact they may have deserved it, and may even try again on someone else or me if I don't get paroled, well, despite all that, Frankie knew the difference. And so do I. Warden Jones held out his hand, and in it was a letter, an unopened letter. Mary's handwriting was on the front. I looked at him, and knew he had broken a strict rule for me, and I lowered my head to him in thanks. I took the letter slowly, and held it for a moment. It smelt of her, that scent I'd known so long ago, and I felt my eyes grow hot and prickly. Warden Jones smiled a small smile, almost Frankie's smile, and I sat down and heard the door shut behind me. I opened her letter with trembling fingers and took a deep breath. It was handwritten, and her flowing writing told me everything and nothing I wanted to hear. I don't know if you're alive or dead. You never wrote to me, not once, and I still don't know why. I don't know if you read these. You went to hell for me, and all I've ever done is write you letters for it. I miss you, and us. I know you've only ever wanted to protect me, and that by not writing back, you might think you're protecting me from hearing about the horrors of prison or something. You probably don't know that you're putting me through horrors out here, too. I don't know if you're reading this, or if it's sitting in the bin, or if you're just a name in a book that they see and throw the mail away. I miss my friends so much. I was stumbling through the dark, and there you were, my shining light. I loved you so much then, Alec. I wanted you to hold me and kiss me and tell me everything was going to be okay. And now, I can't do it for you. I guess I wish we'd had more time, and that you should know everything. My father is dead. He had a massive heart attack last year after Mum left him. She left him after she found out what he'd done to me and what he'd done to you. He drank himself to death, and I went to his funeral. I miss the man he could have, should have been. I'm not even angry anymore. I'll never forgive him, but it doesn't matter so much anymore. He made me strong enough to hate him after he took you away from me. No, that's wrong. You made me strong. I've been waiting for you for all these years, and you haven't come back to me. I got a new joy, working in a nightclub in the city, called Night. I've got a bar apprenticeship going there with the lady in charge, Lauren. She's really nice, and her brother's nice too. He's in charge of the security staff. He left to go overseas a little while ago, and now that he's back, he's looking to hire some new people. There's another guy here that's asked me out, and I'm gonna say yes. You made me strong. You made me cry. You made me everything I am, and now you're not here. Or I'm not important to you anymore. It's okay. People change, and God knows you're in a place I could never be strong enough for. I loved you so much, Alec. I just want you to be happy. Okay, and if you do read this, then please believe me, I'm going to be okay. Thanks to you. Always your friend, Mary. My breath was ragged in my throat, pain laced across my back and neck, and I couldn't see straight. My vision swam as I fought for breath. I gulped in fresh air and stood there, so exhausted I couldn't move. There was nothing I could do, for a while at least. Maybe I could get strength enough to move. Mr. Kane? I looked up and stared at the 3 men and 3 women who sat at a long table in front of me. Would you tell us, please, why we should allow your release from this institution? I swallowed the lump in my throat and breathed in shallowly. What would my qualifications need to be? The young woman sat back in her chair and tapped her pen on her notebook. Well, you would need to show remorse and be conscious of the fact that this behavior isn't regarded as acceptable in modern society. This is not the Stone Age, Mr. Kane. I took a deep breath, and the ache in my chest slowed to the back of my mind. The rationale behind assaulting someone like that is simple, miss. He abused his daughter, my best friend. I didn't go there to do anything. I'd been there so many times, it was automatic. I hated him, and he'd hit her and abused her. I couldn't even comfort her, so I lowered myself to his level. He's dead now. His own fate caught up with him. Do I regret choking him until he nearly died? No. I wish instead that he could have been the father to his daughter than he should have been, the husband to his wife. The woman pursed her lips and leant forwards to mark something in her book, but stopped. You show little remorse. I didn't say anything for a moment, but stared out at the window, where a tiny bird sat. A free bird. My hatred of him made me into something I never will be again, miss. I regret not what I did, but what it made of me. Something I will never be made of again. The old man on the end of the table grunted. What guarantees does this board have that you will not commit such a crime again? Attempt murder is a dangerous line to cross with no remorse, Mr. Kane. I nodded and felt the ache drain away. Yes, sir, but I did that for the love of my best friend. I no longer have that best friend, or her father to hate, and I'll never have that love. It's a new time for me. We all die young, in one way or another. That's why life is a second chance. Warden Jones shook my hand and smiled at me as the gate opened. I walked past him onto the steps of the waiting bus. I sat down and stared ahead at the open road, and at the small bird perched on the front of the car, and thought a lot about where I was going. First stop was my parents' place, to see my mom and dad. From there, I didn't know. I thought about the crumpled piece of paper in my pocket, Mary's letter. The miles moved past me unnoticed as my thoughts rounded to nowhere. After a time, I came to an old bus stop, and my finger pressed into the buzzer, and the bus pulled over. I stepped onto concrete my feet had not touched in nearly a decade. I walked for an hour, along the river where I had first kissed Mary behind the trees when I was 9, past the pool where she had kissed me back. I knelt down beside the huge rock where we used to lay in the sunshine and talk, and try not to think about one another. So close, so achingly close. Under the bridge I walked, until I found the spot where we used to hide things for one another to find. Under the loose stones and the old legs of the bridge. I bent low, and still managed to bump my head. My shoes in my hand. I sat down and moved my fingertips across the surface of the rock. I heard the faint sound of laughter, and looked down the river to where children were splashing one another with utter sinful joy, still in their school clothes. Something twisted inside of me, and I began to cry. For Mary, for myself, for the lost years, for the lost time. I pulled Mary's letter out of my pocket and read it again. It hurt less the second time, but not by much. As I sat there, I realized that I had held on to Mary far tighter than she had held on to me. She was in the outside world, which changed day by day and moved on. Prison is routine and more routine. The same every day, with only new faces and stories to change it. I lifted the rock up, and there lay a small box, a jewelry box for a necklace or something. I opened it and found a jewel pendant with a silver, jade, and ebony bear paw print in the center. It was linked to an American Indian-style necklace. It loosely fitted, sitting in the hollow of my throat and sitting no lower. I stood up, again forgetting that I was taller than when I was 9, and hit my head on the bridge above. I waded across the river and moved up the grassy hill to the side road my parents lived on. I knocked on the door, and after a moment, my father opened it. His old eyes, hidden behind glasses now, opened wide, and he gave a laughing shout, and his arms were around my shoulders, and tears were in his eyes. I hugged him back, and I heard a startled cry from the hall, and Mum was there too, all three of us standing in the doorway. There was a questioning voice, and someone came around the corner, and I saw her. Mary. But not Mary. Something different. Someone else? I frowned, and she laughed and came forwards to hug me as well. She was young, only 11 or so. A tiny promise of naughty in her eyes, and Mary's hair. Her mother's. Jesus. Nicole? Her wide jade eyes laughed at me, and she gave me a dazzling smile. Last time I saw you, you were barely, what, 4? Mary's baby sister nodded and squeezed my waist in her little arms. Yeah, that'd be about then. It's been a while. Mum's out of town, so I'm staying with Mr. and Mrs. Kane while she's away. You been working out, huh? All I remember of you is that picture up on the wall. I looked at the memory and almost smiled, but not quite. There was a hint of the person I was now, in the face and stance. But there was muscle where once there was nothing, and the eyes were different. So where's Mary? Nicole shrugged. She's moved into the city these days. She works at a club called The Night. She's one of the top bar girls there. She can do the whole Coyote Ugly spinning thing and everything. All the guys go after her, but she's still technically single. There was something in her voice, a hope almost. I hugged her and looked at Mum, who smiled sadly at me. Dad cleared his throat and held up a set of keys. I can book you in at work tomorrow. You can get yourself a license. You could ride before you could walk, so doing it legally shouldn't be a hassle. Want to see if you can still steer the thing? I held out my hands and Dad dropped the keys into my palm. I smiled then, feeling like I was home for the first time. I hadn't ridden in 7 years now, but when I slid the bolt back from the garage door and saw the little bike, I felt my eyes grow hot again. I touched the handle, and Dad cleared his throat from the doorway. We've given that one to Nicole. She rides almost as good as you did at her age. I bought you something, thinking you'd get out one day and need it. He threw the covers back off of another bike, and the tears flowed. Slashes of black, silver, and blue covered the outer casing. Chrome covered the rest. It was beautiful, sleek, fast, and with a small silver dragon on the fuel casing. Ducati. You can go for a run if you like. I shook my head and folded my hand over the keys. No thanks, Dad. Maybe later. Right now, I just want to spend some time here. He nodded and stepped back out of the garage. I followed, and we shut the gate slowly. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. It's damn good to have you back, boy. Let's go have some dinner, huh? 3 days later, I was speeding down the highway with fresh clothing and a license. The city beckoned me, and I was coming. There was more traffic on the road than there used to be, but for all the changes, there was little difference, or at least it seemed that way to me. Some of the buildings looked newer, and others didn't. The roads looked the same, although dotted here and there with some travesty that could have been modern art. Night fell, and I was still traveling. The bike was amazing, smooth and powerful. It wanted to take me anywhere, but I just wanted to get to Mary. Soon enough, I was in the inner suburbs and came across some familiar streets. The night was built on the bones of a pool hall my father had once frequented, and I stared up at the huge building which pulsed with a heartbeat of party music. There were hundreds of people there, and maybe even thousands, all clamoring to get in. I'd never seen anything like it. I stepped up to the entrance and looked around, a little stunned at the enormity of the place, and the fact that there were so many people, all trying to get in. There was a huge, tall guy on the front door who was scanning the crowd with a professional eye, not budging an inch for all the screams, money, or promises that were waved in his face. He caught my eye and jerked his head forward. I frowned and turned, thinking he'd meant someone else. I'm Jason Trojas. What can I do for you? I didn't say anything until I turned back and saw him staring at me. I opened my mouth, then leaned it closer. I hear they're looking for some more workers. Security guys, whatever, you know? He nodded. I am. You a skin? I nodded once, and he looked at his watch. You want to talk business? Come back around 2 or 3? It slows down a little after then, when the shift changes. We get more people on. It's a little easier to handle. See you then. I blinked, then nodded. I turned to go, and he grabbed my shoulder. Look, if you want to go in, have a look around, you're welcome. It's a private party upstairs, so if you want, get one of the girls in the bar to fix you a drink. It shouldn't be too busy. I swallowed and nodded, and his eyes narrowed. I pushed past him and made my way through. There was an upstairs area that was completely packed, and a band played downstairs. I made my way over to the bar and sat down. I looked around, but couldn't see anyone. The club was quiet on the floor, with only a few people in. The larger room upstairs seemed to be completely packed, and I rubbed my chin as I considered it. It seemed like a nice place, and even if she wasn't here anymore, I did need a job. I had the control, the ice temperament, and the skills to back up whatever happened. I'd never been any type of security guard, but then, this wasn't exactly security guard type work. I leant back against the bar and a voice broke through my train of thought. What can I get you, hon? I turned to the voice and faced an incredibly beautiful woman of medium height with platinum blonde hair. Her eyes were a freakish blend of swirling orange and green, until I realized that they were contacts. I looked past her at the fridge and spotted some bottled water. I spread my hands and said that would be fine. She nodded and opened up the fridge. There was a sound of clicking heels, and the woman turned her head as she opened the till. I handed her my money and took the top off. The water was cool and reminded me of the creek Mary and I used to play in. I stared down at the bottle in my hands and realized that the woman who had served me was talking to someone at the other end of the bar. I stared at my hands, letting my hearing pick up anything in the room. I didn't even know why I was there. What was I expecting? To get out, grab a job, earn $1 million, and get the girl of my dreams. Her last letter stated pretty emphatically that she wasn't interested. I don't know how I'm gonna last down here for another 30 minutes, Lauren, I swear. These guys upstairs just stop drinking long enough to try and shag anything moving past, and then they go right back to it. If only they'd be a bit more charming then. Hey love, your hair matched downstairs too. Then I might consider actually being nice to them. Lauren laughed. Then go. It's nothing we can't handle. I appreciate the fact you came in on your day off. Come on, Mary. Why don't you knock off? She sighed. God, I miss. I knew it was her. I knew her voice. I'd known her voice for as long as she'd used it. I put the bottle down and stood up. I didn't want to turn, but I knew I should. My eyes slid into hers, and my breath stopped. I knew I was crying, and I didn't care. My breath was ragged, and I tried to speak, but couldn't. The tray she was carrying hit the floor with a smash, and the glasses scattered everywhere. The smashing glass broke the spell, and she ran. I called out to her, and started to run. We collided against the back door, and burst out into the cool night. I reached out and grabbed her hand, and she whirled around and slapped me. You scumsucker. You're alive. I massaged my jaw and didn't say anything. Mary's breath was steaming the night air. Her awkward curves were gone, slimmed away in pure woman. She had low-cut black pants on and a white top. Her hair was caught up behind the nape of her neck in a gentle twisting ponytail, and her eyes were teared up. I stood back and stared at her. You were all I had. I had nothing but you and your letters. You were right. I was so scared if I told you how things were without you, that you'd run a mile and never come back. I thought you were safe from your father. You had the world and you were moving and changing, and all I had was you, and nothing else. Of course I'd come to find you. Her breath was coming fast, and her face was screwed up in anger, or something very much like it. Hurt. She was hurt. Because I was there. I straightened. I shouldn't have. I thought, you've moved on, that's fine. I understand that. I thought. I didn't think. I've hurt you. She stepped closer to me and put her hands on my chest. My heart was racing, and I held my hands over hers. She leant in and put her forehead on my chest. What do you want? I didn't know what to say, and yet I did. I always had. I want to be your one. When you feel all alone, and there's no one, I want to be. When the walls are closing in, I want to stop them. When the dark is there again, and you can't take any more. I want to be the one you. I want you. I always have. I always will. I want you. She stared at me, and I stopped talking. I knew then. It had been a mistake to come. A mistake to. Mary slammed into me, her hands going around my neck and her lips pressing against mine. Her hands were on the back of my head, and then we were kissing, and it was all there was in the world. I wanted to talk, to let her know how much she meant to me, to do anything, to just kiss her. My hands snaked around her waist and lifted her against me. There wasn't anything else in the world except for the feeling of the two of us together, and feeling that was enough. There was an embarrassed cough, and we parted for a moment. Jason and Lauren stood at the doorway, with Jason looking up and Lauren looking on approvingly. "So I guess you're all right then. See you on Thursday, kid." Mary laughed and kissed me again, and I heard the door close. Somehow we got back to her place, and Mary's hands ripped at my shirt. I had her top off in seconds, and we stumbled into her lounge room. The lights were off, but a fish tank in the corner provided a pale blue light to see by. Mary's shirt was over her head before we hit the floor, and mine was a button-less shredded mess in seconds. Mary moved against me like a drowning woman, clinging to me in powerful need, and I clung to her too. She reared back in surprise when she brought me out of my boxers. I was strong and hard and scared. She was kissing me lightly, moving against me, and I began to stammer. I've never. Mary stopped for a moment. "I know. SSH. It's okay. I waited for you, too." I frowned, and she colored. I brought her up into the circle of my arms and kissed her again. She rolled over, still kissing me with tender, light kisses. Shyly, she pulled me against her. I murmured my love into her ear. We had tender sex once we were done. I lay like that, perfectly happy. I opened my mouth as she took a deep breath. "I love you." We both said it at once, and then there was silence again. Mary's hands were on my shoulders, and her head lay on my chest. I could smell her chestnut hair, and felt my eyelids drooping closed. Our even breathing soothed one another, and we fell asleep like that. The next morning, the sun woke me as it spilled into the room. Mary stretched languidly, a naughty smile on her face as she surveyed the room and her path of destruction through my clothes. I gave a low laugh, and she held out her arms. I picked her up and pressed her close to my body, kissing her as hard as I could. "When did you get those?" I looked down and she was pointing to my abs, and I smiled again. I thought I should give me something to do inside. It was either this or cross-stitch. I'm not good with needles, so? Mary threw my shirt around her shoulders and tied the ends together across her stomach. She was wearing my boxers, so at least she was mildly covered. Problem is, there was something unbelievable sexy about her dressed in my clothes, and my stomach growled. Mary quirked her naughty smile at me and made her way into the kitchen. She poured 2 glasses of orange juice for us and handed me one. A phone began to ring, and Mary laughed as she looked around at the shambles we'd left her living room in, and I looked, too. The phone continued to ring, and I reached down and pulled it from out under the table and handed it to her. She smiled at me ruefully and flipped it open. "Hey, it's Mare. What's up?" She listened for a moment, then smiled. "Hey, kiddo. Yeah, he's here. I'll put him on." She held out the phone, and I took it slowly. "Hey." Nicole's voice shouted down the phone. "There were 2 guys here looking for you. Lawyers. They say you have to ring them and talk to them to set up a meeting. There's some Franklin Roosevelt somebody or something that made you their will receiver." I frowned for a moment. "You mean the executor?" There was a rustle of paper, and Nicole hummed to herself for a moment, a habit Mary had when we were children, whenever she was thinking about something. "No, I'm pretty sure they said that's what they were there for. You get everything he owns." "Is that the executor?" I shook my head. "Crazy old scumsucker." "No, kid, but it's okay. I'll call by later. I gotta go shopping first." Mary covered her mouth and giggled. Nicole cleared her throat and sighed. "Okay, sure. Well, they're here now. So do I tell them to come back at lunchtime or something?" "They're standing out on the porch." I laughed and told her that would be fine. After I hung up the phone, I shook my head and stared at Mary. An old friend I met inside made me the executor of his will. He'd been in prison nearly 60 damn years. What's he got left to have a will for? Mary shook her head and shrugged. "Why don't we talk about it over lunch? I'm taking you shopping." I smiled at her. "Sure, but first, why don't we have some breakfast? I'm hungry." Mary licked her lips and dropped her glasses on the table as she moved around into my arms. At last, I was truly home. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
This story is almost unbelievable, full of ups and downs that could be a movie. I've been happily married for over 30 years, or so I thought. I have 3 beloved children and owned a convenience store gas station. I'm not rich, but make a good living. A few years ago, my 28-year-old son was hospitalized with a kidney problem. He's married with 2 children. My wife Annabelle, Annie, and I were terrified for his life. The doctor said he might need a transplant if his condition didn't improve. They suggested we talk to family members about donation possibilities. Without telling Annie, I got tested to see if I was a match. The results showed I wasn't compatible. Shocked, I asked the doctor why, considering he was my son. The doctor, embarrassed by my outburst, asked me to come into his office. "Mr. Weller, the test shows you're not his biological father. We're redoing the test to confirm," he said. In shock, I couldn't tell Annie yet. Questions about my other children, Janice and Mandy, raced through my mind. Janice was 26, Mandy 20. I hoped the doctor was wrong. 2 days later, the doctor brought good news. Brad's kidneys were responding to treatment, and he wouldn't need a transplant. Relieved, everyone cried with joy. I still hadn't told Annie about the test. The next day, I asked Annie, Janice, and Mandy for DNA samples, explaining it would help in future medical issues. Annie was nervous but agreed, as did the others. I also collected samples from Janice's family. The hospital confirmed Brad wasn't biologically mine. I asked them to analyze the other samples. "Mr. Weller, are any of them your family?" "They're all my family. I need to know if Janice and Mandy are my biological children," I replied. Brad was released from the hospital a few days later. After a week of recovery, he could return to work. Everyone was relieved he didn't need dialysis or a transplant. I tried to stay calm, but it was hard. I needed to know if my daughters were biologically mine. Annie noticed my odd behavior and asked about it almost every night. I told her I was just thinking about our children, which was partly true. One evening, I came home to find Annie crying over some papers from the hospital. "When did you do it, and why?" she asked. "I got tested to see if I could donate my kidney to our son. The doctor said I wasn't his biological father, so I had tests done on the girls too." Annie revealed, "Janice isn't yours, but Mandy is." She was crying hard. "What happens now, Dan?" I didn't know. After 30 years of marriage, I had just learned 2 of my children weren't mine. I told Annie, "We need to talk. Maybe we'll stay together, or maybe we'll split up." "Dan, that was over 28 years ago. Can't we leave the past behind?" "No, we can't. You had an affair. I need to know who I've been raising. Janice and Brad are siblings, so this wasn't a one-time thing. Who were you having an affair with?" "It was Harvey. It was stupid and wrong, but it's over." "Harvey, our best friend who died 25 years ago? Did his wife Mary know? Did she join you?" "Please, Dan, let's not discuss this. I love you. This is ancient history. Can't we move on?" "Are you out of your mind? We got married, and within a year you started sleeping with Harvey. I raised his child as my own. If he hadn't died, you'd probably still be with him. Explain this." Annie was crying, but I wanted the truth. "I know you and Harvey were friends." "I always loved him, but he chose Mary. I loved you too, but not as much. After he married Mary, I was depressed. You asked me to marry you, and I did it partly out of spite. I wanted to show Harvey I could move on. Then we started an affair. You were often away, and Harvey would come by. It just happened. He stopped seeing me after I got pregnant with Brad. He asked if the baby was his, and I told him I didn't know but wouldn't tell you unless he married me. He laughed and said you could raise his baby. Do you really think I'm that stupid? It just happened." "What just happened?" "If you think I'll believe it just happened, you must be crazy." "What about Janice? Did the same thing happen to her?" "I told him he couldn't come over unless you or Mary were here. I had feelings for him, but he was using me for lovemaking. One day he forced himself on me and threatened to tell you about Brad. He hurt me and said he hoped he got me pregnant again. I couldn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you. After Janice was born, Harvey died in a car accident. I was sad but relieved. I could finally put it behind me and focus on us. I loved you more and more. We had a good life, didn't we?" Annie asked. "Yes, our marriage was good, but now I see it was based on lies. You cheated on me, married me while loving another man, and had children with him. Now you expect me to forget about it. I can't. I'm going to see a lawyer and start divorce proceedings." "Dan, you can't. What about our kids? What will you tell them?" "You can tell them. And just so you know, I don't believe you were molestated. You would have continued the affair if Harvey hadn't died. You have a week to tell me your story. After that, I'll tell them the truth. I assume Brad and Janice don't know I'm not their biological father. No one knows but me, and now you. Please, Dan, they love you. Don't hurt them by telling them their real father is a man they've never met. I am their father. I've raised them, and that won't change. We'll both stay here until the divorce is finalized, unless you have another lover. That's inappropriate, Dan, and you know it. No, the problem is I've been with you for 30 years, and I don't know you. I'll move into the guest bedroom. I don't want anything to do with you. Annie wept as I relocated to the guest room. 2 days later, a call came from the store. Annie's car had crashed after speeding and failing to navigate a turn. Tragically, she died on impact. The sheriff probed for any issues, but I reported none, classifying it as an accident pending autopsy. Breaking the news to our children was agonizing for us all, fueling my doubts about whether it was truly an accident or something more sinister. Days later, the autopsy confirmed it was indeed accidental. At her funeral, I mourned deeply, despite our separation. 3 decades of shared history left me grappling with unresolved emotions. Choosing to keep her affair secret, I resisted consulting a lawyer. The day after her funeral, I asked my daughters and daughter-in-law to divide Annie's belongings, keeping only a few cherished family photos. Tormented by what-ifs, I pondered the consequences of my actions and wondered if things could have been different, or if fate had simply intervened on that fateful day. Update. This happened 2 years ago, just before the holidays. I found myself alone again. My son and oldest daughter live about 100 miles away, and I told them I could visit for a day or two. Mandy, a senior in college, planned to go to England with friends for the holidays. She worried about me being alone, but I assured her I had been living alone for 2 years and spent my days at the service station, never really alone. One day, while watching TV, I saw a commercial about donating $24 a month to help a child in a third world country. It made me skeptical about where the money actually goes. The next day, I asked our local priest, Pastor Jim, if the church had a Christmas campaign to help local families. "Yes, Dan, we do. Do you have a family in mind?" he asked. "No, I need the name of a family I can help," I replied. Jim suggested a young widow with 3 children whose husband was eliminated by a criminal. She had moved to our town for a fresh start. "Thanks, Jim. I'll come by later to get the name," I said. Pastor Jim understood my intent. Though not a regular churchgoer, I wanted to make a difference. I took the name Carmela Wilson from the tree at church. She worked as a waitress at Joe's restaurant where I often ate. I decided to visit Joe's diner to talk to her. At Joe's, I looked around and saw Carmen, who smiled and said she'd be right over. Carmen was in her early 30s, pleasant-looking, with shoulder-length dark hair. She wasn't thin or fat, just an attractive woman with a nice smile. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "Just a cup of coffee and some conversation, if you don't mind." "Sure, for coffee, but I'm not sure about the conversation," she replied. "I'm sorry, I'm not good at talking to women. This isn't a flirtation. I picked your name from the church tree and want to be your friend for the holidays." "Look, I'm not sure what you want. I'll just get your coffee." She spoke to Joe, who nodded, then returned with my coffee. "Okay, Joe says you're fine. I get hit on a lot and don't need that." "So what do you mean by holiday friend? The church put my kids' names on the tree for Christmas, but they didn't mention this." "This is my idea. If you prefer, I can just buy gifts for your kids." I was watching TV and saw a commercial about donating $24 a month to help children in other countries. It got me thinking, I want to help a family through Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'm not rich, but I can afford to help one family, and I chose yours. Carmen's eyes welled up. "Are you serious? I was so worried about my kids this year. You know, my husband was..." "I know, Carmen. He was homicided. Please let me help you. If I'm interfering, just tell me, and I'll back off." "Why are you doing this? Don't you have family to help?" "My wife died 2 years ago in a car accident." "It's okay, Carmen. My holidays have been pretty lonely, and I want to help someone else be happy this year. My children are grown and doing fine. So what do you say? Can we be friends for the holidays?" "You have a kind face, Dan. For the sake of my kids, I'll say yes. Please, no tricks. We've been through a lot." "Let's start by restocking your coffee and figuring out your needs." She poured more coffee and said she needed to get back to work, but agreed to talk after her shift. The next day, I asked her out to dinner, but she said she needed to be with her kids. Instead, she invited me to her home for dinner. "I'll bring pizza. Is pepperoni and cheese okay?" She smiled. "That's great, but bring 2 pizzas. My 8-year-old can eat half of one himself." When I visited her place, I realized she lived in a housing project. These places often have social services support, but are not the best environments due to pills, lovers, and other issues. Now, more than ever, I wanted to help Carmen and her children. Her 8-year-old son met me at the door. He was a cute boy and asked what I wanted. I said I was the pizza delivery guy and that his mom had invited me. He grinned and said, "Mom said her friend is bringing pizza today. We don't get pizza from the store very often." As I entered, 2 other children ran up shouting, "Pizza, pizza, pizza, Mommy, the pizza place is here," a 6-year-old yelled. Carmen appeared from the other room, having tidied up. "Children, where are your manners? I thought I taught you better." "Sorry, Mom, we were just excited," her oldest son said. "We don't get visitors often. Can we have pizza now?" "Kids, this is Dan, a friend of mine. You can call him Uncle Dan or Mr. Dan," I interrupted. "Just call me Dan. What's your name?" The oldest replied, "My name is Mike, and I'm 8 years old." The second one said, "I'm Mark, and I'm 6. This is my little sister Molly." Molly added, "I know who I am. My name is Molly, and I'm 4, soon to be 5. I go to kindergarten, and I'm very smart." She looked a lot like her mom. We all sat down to eat pizza. The furniture was old, and they didn't have much. The TV was on, but the picture was poor. While the kids ate and watched cartoons, I asked Carmen what help she needed. "Oh my God, I wasn't prepared for this. My kids and I are doing fine. They want what other kids have, but I can't afford it. You've seen our TV with the bad picture. We buy clothes secondhand. They're great kids, but I can't buy bikes or anything that might get stolen, so any gift would be appreciated." "Okay, I'll see what I can do. Mike, how about going to the movies on Saturday? There's a new Harry Potter movie." "Wow, that would be great. Mom, can we go?" "Maybe if you behave this week." "Dan, you know this is for you too, Carmen. Maybe we'll eat at McDonald's afterward." Molly said, "I like McDonald's. They have Happy Meals and a playground." "All right, Molly. Be good for Mommy, and we'll go." The kids were thrilled, and Carmen was smiling. I felt good making them happy. We spent weekends taking the kids to fun places. I started eating lunch at Joe's and always sat in Carmen's section, leaving her big tips. "Dan, you don't need to do that. Just make my kids happy." "So you don't need the money?" I smiled. "That's not fair, Dan. I can use the money. I just feel awkward and indebted. Can I make you Thanksgiving dinner or something? I need to do something for you too." "I'll talk to the kids, see what's on our agenda, and call you back. Carmen, I do this because it makes me happy. I enjoy helping people who are trying to help themselves. Please don't feel like you owe me anything. Seeing the kids' faces is enough payback, and your smile is a bonus." She looked slightly embarrassed and turned away. Mandy came home one weekend and asked what was new. I told her about Carmen and how I was helping her. "Dad, do you think this is a good idea? You don't really know her." "Honey, helping someone and seeing those kids' faces gives me a new sense of purpose. I want you to meet Carmen and give me your honest opinion." "I don't know, Dad. It makes me uneasy. Isn't that a rough neighborhood for a single mom and her kids?" "Exactly. That's why I want to help them. You've grown up and don't need my help as much anymore, so I feel I should help someone else. I'll meet them, but I won't promise anything. I'll be honest with you." Mandy was worried, but agreed to meet them. On Saturday, I invited Carmen and the kids over. It was chilly, but I decided to grill. Carmen arrived in a beat-up car with the kids. As she unbuckled them, Mandy remarked sarcastically, "Nice car, Dad." "What would you say if she drove up in a new car?" I asked. "Great idea, Dad. This is for you." She smiled. Mike and Mark ran up to me. "Hey, Uncle Dan. Wow, you live here? What a big house." I introduced them to Mandy as Carmen got Molly out of the car. "Mike, Mark, this is my daughter Mandy." "Hi, boys. Nice to meet you," Mandy said. "Hi, I'm Mike. I'm 8, and Mark is 6. That's our sister Molly. She's 4. Molly walked over, and I picked her up. Mandy watched me closely. "Molly is my little friend. She holds her own against her brothers, just like you used to," I laughed. "Carmen, this is Mandy, my pride and joy." They greeted each other, and I could almost see their minds working. Carmen smiled and said, "I know this is different. I know you have questions. Let's enjoy today, and I'll try to answer them. Your father is one of the nicest people I've met. Show me the kitchen, and we can cook together. Men think grilling is a whole meal, but we know better." Mandy looked at me and said, "I like her already, Daddy." They smiled, and we went inside. The kids explored the house, but were told to stay out of the drawers and not to run. They came back excitedly and told their mom everything they saw. They asked to watch my big screen TV, and I suggested we go to the store to pick out some DVDs. They eagerly agreed, and Molly asked to go too, but Carmen intervened. "Molly, why don't you stay here with Mandy and me to help us cook? We girls need to stick together," Carmen suggested. Molly then told me, "Uncle Dan, take the boys and go ahead. I have to help the girls cook." It was adorable coming from a 4-year-old. I assured her it was okay and promised to rent a movie just for her. I got The Little Mermaid, and she was thrilled. She asked Mandy and her mom to watch it with her and told the boys they could watch too if they were quiet, acting like a little adult. We decided to spend Thanksgiving at my house. Carmen and Mandy would cook, and I would keep the kids busy. I had a pool, closed for winter, and a hot tub, so the kids would bring their swimsuits to soak in it and then watch movies on the big TV. Mandy said she would contact Brad and Janice about the plans and let them know to bring swimsuits if they wanted to use the hot tub. After Carmen and the kids went home, Mandy and I talked. Dad, Carmen is very nice. She's hardworking and has been through a lot with her husband's homicide. I understand why you want to help her and the kids. She doesn't make excuses and genuinely cares about you. I hope she's at least a little grateful, I said. No, Dad. I mean, she might really maybe even love you. She didn't say that, did she? Dad, she didn't have to. Women can sense these things. I think you've fallen for her too. Just be careful. Mandy, I'm just happy to help. This is the happiest I've seen you since Mom died. I just want you to be aware. Mandy's observation hit home. I felt a deep connection to Carmen and her children. Brad and Janice hesitated, but eventually accepted my invitation for Thanksgiving, understanding my involvement with Carmen's family through the Church Tree Initiative. Carmen and Mandy orchestrated the arrangements smoothly over the ensuing weeks, with Carmen taking the lead in planning. Mandy's return home on Fridays became a routine, and I frequented Carmen's restaurant for lunch, often dropping by her apartment to visit the kids and bring treats. Carmen jokingly accused me of spoiling them. Despite my occasional discomfort seeing Carmen interact with customers, particularly men who flirted with her, I recognized my lack of entitlement to jealousy. Update. On Thanksgiving morning, Carmen and her kids showed up early, Carmen looking lovely in a simple outfit. They and Mandy were already busy in the kitchen. Mandy mentioned she'd invited her boyfriend, a paramedic still in college, to join them. They were headed to England for a hospital project over the holidays, leaving just before Christmas and returning in January. Brad, his wife Gail, and my grandkids arrived next. After hugs all around, the kids immediately inquired about the hot tub. I introduced them to Carmen's children, and they hit it off. Mandy introduced Brad and Gail to Carmen as a good friend, which pleased me. Brad seemed intrigued, while Gail offered to assist in the kitchen. Soon after, Janice and Rob arrived with their kids, who headed to the basement to play with the available toys and gadgets. While the women cooked, the men tried to stay out of their way. The guys were curious about Carmen, and I attempted to explain her situation without revealing too much of my own feelings. Turns out I wasn't very subtle about it. She looks good, Dad. How old is she? About my age? Brad asked. She's 31, Brad. She's a wonderful person and deserves some help. Rob added, Dad, aren't you afraid she might fall in love with you, or you with her? Look, I'm a widower, and she's a widow. If something happens, so be it. Dad, this is kind of inappropriate and personal. Brad, as my son, I'll tell you. No, I haven't even tried to kiss her. She's a wonderful woman, and I care about her. I'm sorry, Dad. I know it's none of my business. You must miss Mom. It's been 2 years. This has nothing to do with your mother. I'm lively, and if I find someone attractive, it's my business. Let's change the subject and check on the kids. We went downstairs to watch the kids. Carmen's children got along well with mine. Molly kept coming up to talk to me, which bothered Brad, but Rob found her sweet. Mandy brought her boyfriend Ross down to meet everyone. After introductions, Mandy went back upstairs, and Ross joined our conversation. I met Mandy's friend, Carmen. She's nice. Mandy told me her husband was homicided. I introduced Carmen's kids to Ross. Good kids. Too bad about their father. It's great you're helping them, Mr. Weller. Thanks, Ross. I picked their name off the church tree. So, what's new with you? School and work must be busy. Yes, but we're going on a trip soon. It's work-related, but I'll be with Mandy. How are you and Mandy doing? Brad asked. Ross looked at me, then back at Brad. I love her and plan to propose in front of Big Ben in England. Mr. Weller, do I have your permission? Ross, you don't need my permission. Mandy is capable of making her own decisions. If you need my blessing, you have it. Should I ask her? I think so, but don't mention it yet. I'll see if she's ready. I love her, but I want a yes. Our lips are sealed, Ross. Good luck. The afternoon went wonderfully. Dinner was fantastic, and everyone enjoyed themselves. The kids took turns in the hot tub, but no adults joined them. Carmen told me, maybe another time, and I held her to that. As the evening ended, Mandy and Ross left to be alone. I helped Carmen clean up and Janice and Gail joined in. Brad told Carmen it was nice meeting her and wished her luck before they left. Janice pulled me aside. "Dad, Carmen is great, but she's too young for you." "I'm helping her, Dad. She loves you. We asked if she was dating and she said she had a boyfriend." "Dad, you're that boyfriend. Otherwise she wouldn't have come today. Just be careful." After everyone left, Carmen gathered her kids and told me she had a great time and liked my family. I don't know why, but I leaned in and kissed her. It was a long, soft kiss. When we pulled away, she had tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do that, Dan. I have to go." She gathered the kids, who quickly said goodbye and got into the car. I approached the car window and said, "I'm sorry I stepped out of line. Please forgive me." "The problem is, Dan, I've wanted you to do this for so long." She drove away, and I didn't hear from her for several days. I was worried about what I had done. On Monday, I went to the restaurant, but she wasn't there. Joe told me she had to take Molly to daycare and would be back soon. I planned to return at lunchtime, but had to cover a shift at work. I tried to give Carmen space, knowing I had overstepped. When I got home, my phone rang. It was Carmen. "Hi, Carmen." "I'm so sorry, Dan. Our apartment was broken into. They took everything, even the old TV. All we have left are our clothes." She cried. "I don't know what to do. The police are here taking a report. That's awful. Carmen, pack your clothes and the kids. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Everything will be fine, I promise." "Dan, I didn't know who else to call." "It's okay, Carmen. I'm glad you called. Now go pack and I'll be there soon." I drove over and found Carmen and the kids. Molly was crying and scared. I reassured her and decided to take them to my house. Carmen looked surprised. "I thought you were dropping us off at a motel for the night." "No, you're coming home with me. Pack your car and take my car with the kids. I'll drive yours." She didn't ask questions and did as I said. I spoke to the police officer, gave him my number, and explained they'd be staying with me. The officer said it was unlikely they'd recover anything. With his help, I got Carmen's car started and headed home. When I arrived, Carmen and the kids were on the porch. "It's open. Why didn't you come in?" "You weren't here and we didn't want to just walk in," Carmen replied. "Come on, boys, help me with the bags. Mike and Mark, take your stuff to the room with the bunk beds. Put Molly's and your mom's things in the front bedroom. If you're unsure, leave it in the living room." I turned to Carmen. "We need to talk. Molly, help the boys organize." "Dan, we can't live here." "What will your kids think?" "Carmen, you need help right now. Let's try this for a few days. You and Molly can share the front bedroom and the boys will be comfortable upstairs." "Dan, the boys have school and Molly has kindergarten. I have to work. Living here won't interfere. You might need to leave a bit earlier. I can help with school runs. Call the schools and explain the situation. Give them my name for drop-offs and pickups. It'll work out, I promise." "Dan, I care about you. I like you a lot. Your kids know that, and I need you to know that." "No, women just know it. Men think differently. Mandy, Janice, and Gail all know. I'm sorry, but I can't hide my feelings. I'll worry about my kids. You already have enough to worry about. And I'm not sorry I kissed you. Just thought you should know." I went upstairs to check the boys' room and ensure the dresser drawers were empty. Carmen assisted the boys in organizing their clothes, while Molly and I cleared out the dresser drawers in her room. Once everyone joined us, Molly asked if she could put away her belongings. While Carmen unpacked, I took the boys to prepare dinner. We settled on hot dogs and macaroni and cheese. During the meal, Carmen inquired about house rules. I explained that we would establish them gradually. Until then, the kids needed permission for everything, couldn't enter my room or office without invitation, and were to stay away from the closed pool. They could use the hot tub with permission and watch TV with approval. Keeping their rooms tidy was their responsibility. Carmen chuckled, knowing the boys weren't the tidiest, but at least the rules were clear. I looked at the kids, including Molly, who was always smiling at me. "Kids, this is your home now. Have fun, but always ask your mom if you're unsure about something." "Uncle Dan, what if we get hungry?" Mike asked. "Eat. Tomorrow your mom and I will buy snacks. You will always have food. Remember, your mom is the boss. If your mom says no, don't ask me, and vice versa. No means no. Any other questions?" Molly raised her hand, which made me laugh. "What, honey?" Carmen asked. "Are we allowed to play with the toys in the basement? Because they're not ours." "Honey, you can play with all the toys downstairs. We'll talk to Santa, and he'll probably get you some of your own," I told Molly. Molly raised her hand again. "Can I go play with them?" "Yes, honey, you go ahead. I'll join you in a bit," Carmen said. Molly headed downstairs, followed by the boys. One of them shouted, "Uncle Dan, can we turn on the TV?" I replied, "Yes, just not too loud." Carmen hugged me with tears in her eyes and said, "I don't know what I would have done without you." She wiped her tears, and we didn't kiss or hug again. I squeezed her hands and said, "I'll always be here for you. Let's see what the kids are doing." We went to the basement to join the kids. It felt like a family. It reminded me of when Annie and I used to watch the kids play. As it got late, Carmen told the children to take a bath and get ready for bed. She asked the boys to use the bathroom upstairs, and if Molly could use the main bathroom on the first floor. "Carmen, this is your home now. Of course, Molly can use the big tub and shower. I'll use the basement shower if needed. Please, make yourself comfortable." While Carmen got the kids ready for bed, I went to my office to work on my books. I saw Molly peeking in, dressed in her nightgown. "Hi, Molly. Do you need anything?" "I want to kiss you goodnight, but Mom said I can't come in until you say so." "Come on in, sweetie." She climbed into my lap, wrapped her arms around my neck, and kissed my cheek. "Good night, Uncle Dan," she said. "Good night, sweetheart. Where's Mommy?" "Upstairs arguing with Mikey and Marky. Let's go help." We went upstairs and found them mid-argument. "But Mom, Mike always gets his way because he's older. I just asked for the top bunk, and he said he gets to choose because he's older." Carmen looked at Mike. "Is that what you said, Mike?" "Yeah, but I'm older, so I should get to choose." "Mike, you're 2 years older, so you should be 2 years smarter. Is it worth arguing over which bed you sleep in? Why not share the top bunk and take turns?" Mike looked at Mark. "Okay, Mark, you can have the top bunk this month, and I'll take it next month. We'll swap every month. Deal?" "Yeah. Thanks, Mike," Mark said, climbing into the top bunk. "You feel good inside, don't you, Mike?" Carmen asked. "Yeah, I guess so, Mom." Carmen kissed her sons, then put Molly to bed. "I need to get back to my papers and get ready for bed myself," Carmen said. I went back to my office and heard the shower running, thinking about Carmen. When she finished, she came out in her nightgown and robe, her hair still wet. "Good night, Dan, and thanks for everything." I looked up and said, "Is there anything you don't look good in?" She smiled and headed to bed. I could smell her scent and took a few deep breaths, then continued working. Our first morning was hectic. Carmen asked me to call Joe and inform him she might be late. She needed to update the school and daycare about the change of address. When I called Joe, he questioned if I was serious about Carmen, expressing concern for her well-being. Being married for over 40 years, he didn't want her to get hurt. I reassured him that I would never injure Carmen or her kids. In the evening, we returned to her old apartment to gather her belongings, which weren't much. She returned her keys and informed the office about the move due to the break-in. Mike and Mark rode with me in the truck, while Carmen and Molly followed in her car. Upon our return, Carmen received a call from Mandy. After explaining the situation, Mandy requested to speak with me. "Dad, are you sure about this? You know she loves you, right? What should I have done, Mandy? Just give her money and tell her to manage on her own? I care about her. We're adults and haven't done anything wrong. I'm actually happy she and the kids are here. It's almost like the good old days. Dad, it's a fine line. I like Carmen as a sister, but you two need to be careful and understand what you're doing. Now, can I talk to Carmen again?" She talked to Carmen for about 20 minutes while the boys and I brought the rest of the stuff inside. "What did she want after I gave you your phone back?" I asked. "Mostly girl stuff, but she's worried about us." "What's there to worry about? We're adults. I'm in my 50s and can make my own decisions." "Dan, she knows how much I care about you. I told her that myself, and now you know. I tried to explain that I didn't know where this was going, but you helped me and the kids. I'm eternally grateful for that, but my feelings are stronger than my gratitude. Mandy is worried one of us will get hurt. I told her I would never come between you and your family." "Okay, let's take it one day at a time. Maybe time will help." Just then, Mike and Mark walked in. "Uncle Dan, can we go in the hot tub?" I looked at Carmen and then at the kids. "Only if your mom comes in. You can't go in alone." "Come on, Mom, please. It's warm and has lots of bubbles." "Okay, boys, get your swimsuits on. Molly, get yours, and I'll be right there." She turned to me. "You set me up, didn't you?" I just smiled, and she smiled back, then put on a 2-piece swimsuit. "Happy now?" she asked, smiling as she walked by. "I definitely agree. You rock any outfit. I'm willing to bet you look stunning even without clothes." I grinned. "Creep," she retorted, smiling as she headed for the hot tub. The kids eagerly awaited her. "Wow, she's even more beautiful," I pondered as she settled into the tub. "She seems to have it all." After a few minutes, I handed Carmen a drink. She smiled and said, "The water feels great. My body needed this." The kids watched the bubbles. Thanks, Uncle Dan. This is really cool, Mike said. I took one more look at Carmen and went to finish my paperwork. Later, I heard everyone getting ready for bed. Soon, Molly peeked into my office, smiling and waiting for permission to enter. No one could reject this little girl or her mom. Molly climbed into my lap, kissed me, and hugged me goodnight. Uncle Dan, see you in the morning. I owned a gas station with self-service and a small grocery store. I no longer repaired cars, but occasionally used a tow truck. Carmen called, saying her car wouldn't start again, which was frustrating. I took the tow truck to the diner to pick her up. 2 guys there offered to hook up her battery, clearly hitting on her. She told them no thanks, her friend was coming. When I arrived, they backed off. I told them, thanks, but I'll take it from here, which made them nervous. They left quickly. I hooked up her car, and she climbed into the truck, showing a lot of leg as she straightened her dress. Thanks for coming, Dan. I told you I'd always be there for you. Are you upset someone else offered to help me? Yes and no. I want people to see how amazing you are, but it bothers me when they hit on you. I didn't do anything wrong, Daniel. I know. I was just answering your question. Besides, I don't own you. You told those guys I was your fiancé. Why? I didn't answer. I just drove to the junkyard. Why are we here, Dan? I'll give you a couple of $100 for that junk car. Get your personal stuff out and put it in this garbage bag. We'll sort it later. What am I supposed to drive? We'll talk later. We need to hurry to get the kids. She loaded her stuff, and we got $300 for the car. We picked up Molly's car seat and headed home. I opened the garage and told Carmen she could drive my old car. It only had 8,000 miles and was 4 years old. I bought it with insurance money after Annie's accident. I usually drove the truck, so the car was rarely used. She put Molly's car seat in and left to get the kids. When they got back, Mark said they had a new car, and it was nicer than their mom's old one. Dan, I'll pay you for the car. How much do you want? Carmen asked. Just drive it. You need something better. It's a good car. I'll keep it in my name and pay the insurance. It'll save you money. What if we don't stay together? What if I move? Are you thinking of moving? No, I was just wondering what I'd do with the car if you kicked us out. I'm sorry. I couldn't believe this was our first fight over the car. Carmen, I promise you'll always have a car. I'll put it in writing if you want. I was just worried about you in that old car. I want you safe and here with me. She kissed me, and it felt good. Molly looked at her brothers and said, Mom just kissed Uncle Dan. It was a thank you for letting us use his car. No, it's your mother's car now. She kissed me because I gave her the car. Carmen kissed me again. Okay, everyone, time to get ready for dinner. Should I cook or should Mom drive us to McDonald's in her new car? McDonald's, everyone shouted. Update. I was at the store on Friday while Carmen was at work. My kids, Brad, Janice, and Mandy, came to see me. Dad, we need to talk. Can we go to your house for a bit? They said. Sure, go home. I'll be there in a few minutes. I knew what this was about and was ready. When I got home, they were all in the living room. Dad, this is about Carmen and her kids, Brad began. Seriously, Brad, you drove 2 hours for this? What did Carmen do to make you dislike her so much? It's not that we dislike her, Janice said. One day you're helping her, and the next she's living here with her kids. Your car is gone too. Did you give it to Carmen? As my kids, I'll explain, but I'm disappointed in all of you. Dad, I think Carmen is using you, Brad said. You're lonely, and she meets your needs. You fell in love, and now her kids are taken care of. Crap, Brad, Mandy jumped in. I know Carmen better than you. She loves Dad, and he loves her. I'm here to support them. Brad, if you weren't my son, I'd knock you off your chair. What should I have done when Carmen needed help? Give her money? Ignore her? I did what I thought was right. Dad, are you saying you've never had lovemaking with her? Janice asked. No, we haven't. Not that it's your business, and I'm thinking of asking Carmen to marry me. What? Brad said. You hardly know her. She has a lot of baggage and 3 kids. She's closer to my age than yours. You all have your own lives. I've found someone I care about who cares about me too. I have a big house to share. Why are you against it? Okay, Dad, Brad said. Let's say you love each other. Do you really want to start over raising 3 young kids? I love those 3 kids. They remind me of when you and I used to play, Brad. Molly hugs me and sits on my lap like you two did when you were little. They're great kids, and I can make a big difference in their lives. Dad, you're seeing things too positively. They're not your biological children. Do you really want to spend the next 20 years raising kids that aren't yours? What do you think, Janice? Should they be my biological kids? I don't know. I love you, and you'll always be my father. But can you raise someone else's child? I don't know, Janice. Would you have loved me if I wasn't your biological father? Would you consider me your father if I wasn't? You're my father, and it's too hypothetical. You've always been there for me, so I'd still consider you my real father. But what does that have to do with raising Carmen's kids? Hold on, I have something to show you. I brought out the DNA tests. Your mom and I kept some secrets. It might be a mistake to show you, but you need to understand. I love Carmen's kids and know I can be a good father to them. I handed them the DNA results. What is it? Janice asked. These are your DNA results, Brad and Janice. They show your siblings with the same biological parents. But Mandy's results are different, meaning only one of her parents is the same as yours. Mandy started crying. Are you saying you're not my biological father? No, Mandy, I'm not Brad's or Janice's biological father. They were all shocked. What? Brad said. You've always been my father, Janice cried. Is that why you asked about my father? You are my father, no matter what the test says. I love you, Dad. I just want you to be happy with Carmen. I'm so confused. Brad asked, Are you going to tell us about our biological father? First, Brad, know that I have always considered you and Janice my children. Nothing has changed except what you know now. You are my son, and Janice is my daughter. It's not just blood that makes a family, it's love and compassion. I planned to tell them about their biological father, but I wanted them to know I always loved them like my own. The past with their mother was over, and I didn't want them to know we were going to divorce. Your mom and I married young. Both Harvey Kittle and I loved her. Harvey also loved Mary, got her pregnant, and they married. I married your mom and was very happy. Later, your mom told me she had married Harvey, and we all stayed friends. Your mom got pregnant with you, Brad, and then Janice. After Janice was born, Harvey died, and your mom became depressed. She confessed you two were Harvey's kids. I was shocked, and we split up for a month. I missed my kids, so we talked and decided to stay together. Your mom became a wonderful wife, and I loved you both as my own. Then Mandy was born, and she was definitely mine. We lived happily until your mom's accident. Dad, why did you take the kidney test if you weren't my biological father? Brad asked. I hoped and prayed I was a match for you, Brad. You were my son, and I would have given you my kidney in a heartbeat. Did you take a match test before Brad went to the hospital? Janice asked. No, it was expensive, and your mom had already told me the truth. There were no surprises. When I took the test, I knew the results. By the way, I have the test results of all your families. Brad, you and Gail are the biological parents of your children. Janice, you and Rob are also the parents of your children. Your mom was a great mother and wife. Let's leave it at that. I'm sorry, Dad. I was thinking more about us than about you and Carmen, Brad said, starting to cry. Brad, in situations like this, people often worry about inheritance. I think you're more concerned about that than about me and Carmen. You three will always be in my will, each getting a fair share. I'm disappointed you haven't shown compassion for Carmen and her children. Janice hugged me, saying she didn't believe the test, and that I would always be her father. I hugged her back. Just as I started to hug Mandy, Carmen pulled up. Well, looks like we're all going out to dinner, unless you want to tell Carmen why you're here, I said. Carmen walked in. Hi, everyone. What brings you all here? Mandy thought quickly. It's my last day off from home, and we decided to go out to dinner. Great. Give me a minute to change out of my waitress uniform. Kids, talk to Mandy, Janice, and Brad while I get dressed. Molly hugged Brad. Hi, Brad. I like you. Brad looked at me, realizing what I meant. Mike asked Janice, Did you bring your kids so we can play? We're learning to share our toys better. No, they're home. Maybe you can visit after Christmas, Janice replied. Can I, Uncle Dan? I've never been to their house. We'll see, Mike. It's still a couple of weeks away, I replied. Mandy asked Mark what was new. We bought a new car, and Mom kissed Uncle Dan. Everyone was looking at me, but Carmen saved the day. Yes, Mike. I kissed him twice for letting us use the car. We're using it now to go to dinner. Come on, kids, back in the car. Uncle Dan will drive, so you all sit in the back. After dinner, Brad apologized privately. I'm sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have questioned you. It's okay to wonder, Brad. It's just how you did it. If my actions bother you, let's discuss them until we understand each other. He smiled when I said father and son. Later, I talked with Janice, too. I wanted my kids to know I was always there for them. I'm still unsure if telling them was right, but it's done. Mandy asked if I could babysit so she could shop with Carmen. I gave them a list and money, asking them to store the items for me. I wanted to buy the kids bicycles since they could now ride them in a safe neighborhood. I asked Carmen if she needed money for shopping. No, I'm just buying for you and the kids for Christmas. I got $300 when my friend sold my old car. She was too proud to take more money. She wanted to give the kids nice things without spoiling them, which wasn't easy. I borrowed Carmen's car to take the kids shopping. She laughed. Just be careful and don't eat in it. I only got it a few days ago. We visited Santa and took pictures. I told the kids we were shopping for Mom for Christmas and gave each $20, explaining it was only for her gift. Keep it in your pocket and only take it out when you're ready to pay, I said. The kids initially looked at expensive things, so I took them to a kid-friendly store. The clerk helped them find items within their budget, and I asked to be notified if they needed more money. The kids worked hard to find the perfect gifts for their mom. Mike asked if I could lend him $5. Uncle Dan, Mom loves unicorns, and it costs $25. I'll give you the difference if you wash my truck. Deal! Thanks, Uncle Dan! Mike ran to buy the unicorn. Mark was looking at movies. Mark, you're supposed to be shopping for your mom. Mom likes Titanic and Shrek, but I don't have enough for both. Take them both. Here's the extra money. When Mike washes my truck, you help him. Thanks, Uncle Dan. Mom will love them. Molly couldn't find a gift she liked. None of them smell like Mom, I whispered to the saleswoman. White diamonds. Sir, it's $50. She only has $20. Tell her it's on special for $20 and I'll pay the difference. Molly, the saleswoman said, I have a bottle of perfume that smells like your mom. It's our last bottle and costs exactly $20. Molly smiled, pulled out her money, and bought it. We picked up our purchases and visited Santa again. I asked the kids to help me find a gift for Mandy. She was going to England, and I wanted to buy her new luggage. The children were eager to help, and I pretended to need their advice as we looked at the luggage section. This way, Uncle Dan. The suitcases are here. Thanks, boys. Now I need a set with 5 pieces. They found a set with 5 pieces of luggage. I want to help, Uncle Dan. What can I do? Molly asked excitedly. You can pick a color for Mandy. Molly chose a bright pink set, but it only had 3 pieces. She kept looking and found a dark blue set with 5 pieces. So we bought that one. We stopped for lunch and then went home. The kids hid their gifts for Mom in my office. They put Mandy's luggage on her bed with a Christmas card signed by all 3 kids. When Mandy got home, she saw the luggage and was thrilled. She hugged and thanked them. The next few weeks flew by with work and the kids' school activities. We decorated a Christmas tree for the first time in 3 years, making the holiday season special. Mandy went to England, and we planned to visit Janice and Brad the day after Christmas. Christmas preparations were hectic, but our evenings were wonderful. We watched Christmas programs together every night. I bought Carmen a few things, including a gift certificate and an engagement ring. I also got her a hot red nightgown. Christmas morning, the kids were excited to find presents under the tree and in their stockings. Watching them open gifts and seeing Carmen's joy was heartwarming. Carmen got her favorite movies from Mark, a unicorn from Mike, and perfume from Molly. Molly said, Mommy, that was the last bottle, and I just had enough money. Carmen smiled when she saw the $50 price tag. I got nice gifts from Carmen. She said Mandy helped her pick them out. I had hidden bikes for each child around the house, and their happiness was priceless. Molly and Mark got training wheels, but we knew Mark wouldn't use them since his older brother didn't. While the kids played, I gave Carmen a big box with hot nightgowns. Wow, what made you buy this? She asked. This comes with it, I said, handing her a small package. She cried when she saw the engagement ring, and I asked her to marry me. Why, Dan? Why? Because I love you and want you and the kids to be with me always. So, is the answer yes? Dan, the answer is no. Please hear me out. I love you, but we've only known each other for a couple of months. After the holidays, things will go back to normal. I have a proposition. Okay, I'm listening. I want to rent out our rooms and give you $200 a week. I want us to live as a family. If in 6 months you think it's not working, we'll make other arrangements. I need you to be sure and see that I truly love you. All I'm asking for is time. I'm not going anywhere until you send me away. She handed the ring back and kissed me. She asked to keep the nightgown, hinting that we should take our time and make sure marriage was what we both wanted. I could live with that, hoping it would bring us closer. The kids played with their toys all day. Despite the cold, they wanted to ride their bikes, so Carmen and I bundled up and watched them. In the afternoon, Mandy called from England to announce her engagement. We congratulated her and wished her a Merry Christmas. That evening, we watched A Christmas Story together, and the kids thanked me for the best Christmas ever before bed. Carmen took a shower, and I could smell her perfume from the hallway. She appeared at my door in her new nightgown, asking to come in. "Dan, I love you, but we need to postpone the wedding until we know each other better. Can we start tonight? Will you make love to me?" She smiled as she walked in, and we spent an unforgettable night together. In the morning, she was asleep with Molly. I made coffee and prepared for the day. We had breakfast and then headed to Janice's for Christmas dinner. Brad and his family were there too. We exchanged gifts, and I was touched they included Carmen and her kids. Mandy explained our tradition of not buying gifts for adults, but Brad mentioned Gail thought a sweater would look good on Carmen. Later, Brad asked if I had proposed to Carmen. "I did, but she turned me down," I said. "What? I can't believe it. She loves you, Dad. What happened?" "She thinks it's too soon. She wants to make sure we're making the right decision and wants to contribute financially. She doesn't want handouts, but a loving relationship. So we're giving it time." "Wow, Dad, don't lose her. She's special." "Time, Brad. We'll give it time." Life continued, and we formed a family. Carmen and I shared cooking duties and managed expenses through a joint checking account. Major purchases were discussed beforehand. Though I usually lunched at Joe's, I'd wait for Carmen to join me. We functioned like a married couple, minus the fights, enhancing everything with our love. Mandy observed our closeness, but remained silent. As Mandy's wedding neared, she asked Carmen to be her maid of honor, bringing tears of joy to Carmen's eyes. Although she considered Molly for the flower girl, she opted for one of her nieces instead. The lead-up to Mandy's wedding was busy. She had just graduated, and we were caught up in planning. My girlfriend was a bridesmaid. Fortunately, the weather allowed us to open the pool, keeping the kids occupied while Mandy and Carmen handled wedding preparations. I remained nearby. As the wedding approached, I pondered my relationship with Carmen. I adored her kids, and they adored me. I had a surprise planned for Carmen at the wedding, as we hadn't discussed marriage since Christmas. On the big day, I donned my tuxedo. Brad and Rob were in the wedding party, alongside Janice and Gail. Everyone was dressed up, and the ceremony was imminent. Carmen, as a bridesmaid, was busy. I sat with her kids in the front row, instructing them to behave. I would walk Mandy down the aisle. As the music played, Janice walked down the aisle, greeted softly by the kids. Gail followed, receiving the same greeting. When Carmen came next, the kids excitedly greeted her, prompting her to quiet them. The flower girl and ring bearer, Janice and Rob's children, followed, with the kids waving at them. As Mandy walked down the aisle with me, tears of joy filled our eyes. Molly's exclamation of, "Wow, Aunt Mandy looks like a princess," drew chuckles and a smile from Mandy. Then I took my seat. Glancing at my family, I felt immensely blessed. My daughter Janice, daughter-in-law Gail, beloved Carmen, daughter Mandy, and future son-in-law Ross. Brad and Rob stood with them, while my grandchildren played their roles. At the reception, Carmen joined me for the first dance. "I love you, Carmen," I said. "I love you too, Dan. Are you serious? Do you really want this?" she asked. "Dan, I mean it deeply," she replied, kissing me publicly for the first time. Later, it was time to toss the bouquet. Brad urged Carmen to join since she was single. Mandy threw the bouquet right to her. The garter toss followed, and Ross handed it to me, saying, "This belongs to my father-in-law." Everyone, including Carmen, was curious. She sat down, and I, on one knee, slid the garter up her leg. Reaching her hip, I pulled out a wedding ring from my pocket, still on my knees. "Carmen, after another 6 months surrounded by family and friends, I propose to you. Will you marry me?" Silence filled the room as everyone waited for her response. Then, from the crowd, Molly stepped forward. Seeing her tearful mother, she urged, "Say yes, Mommy. Dan, I love you wholeheartedly. I'll do anything to make you happy. Yes, I'll marry you." Cheers erupted. Mandy approached Carmen, and they both cried. There likely wasn't a dry eye in the place, including mine as I kissed my bride-to-be. Now happily wed, Carmen left her job at Joe's Diner to help run the gas station and convenience store. She's well-liked, making the workplace feel more family-oriented. We're considering adoption, a decision we'll make together. Molly already calls me Daddy, while the boys sometimes switch between Daddy and Uncle Dan, perhaps to confuse their friends. Reflecting on life, I wonder how knowing about Harvey Kittle or if Annie's accident hadn't happened would have changed our family's path. Life's fragility and the impact of early mistakes weigh on my mind. Snuggled with my new wife on the couch, we watch our new family play on the floor as we enjoy a love story on TV. Mark's Christmas gift, Titanic, brings us together except for Molly, who tends to doze off halfway through.
It started early one Saturday morning. I woke up to a loud noise coming from downstairs. At first, I thought maybe it was the television left on or some kind of accident, but as I rubbed my eyes and listened more closely, it became clear that it was crying, loud, almost frantic crying. There were only 2 people in the house, me and my wife. So, naturally, I got out of bed, threw on a shirt, and went downstairs to see what was going on. As I approached the living room, the sound became sharper, more strained, and undeniably hers. When I entered the room, I saw her sitting on the couch, face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The scene startled me. She wasn't someone who broke down like this over trivial matters, at least not usually. I stood there for a moment, taking it in, before I asked her outright, "What's going on? Why are you crying?" She lifted her head, her face blotchy and red, and looked at me with a mix of frustration and despair. Between sobs, she said, "They called me boring. They said I was dull. I was confused." "Who?" I asked, my tone firm but not unkind. "People on Instagram," she blurted out. I posted a story about my Pilates routine, and instead of supporting me, they made fun of it. They called me uninteresting, said I'm wasting my time, that nobody cares. I thought it would be inspiring, but now, she broke down again. I stood there, unsure of how to respond. Social media drama wasn't exactly my area of expertise, nor was it something I considered worth losing sleep over. Still, this clearly mattered to her. "Look," I said, crossing my arms, "forget about them. They're nobodies. People talk trash online because they've got nothing better to do. You shouldn't take it seriously." My tone was practical, straightforward, and maybe a little dismissive. But her reaction told me my words hadn't helped. Instead of calming down, she seemed even more upset. "You don't get it," she snapped, wiping her face aggressively with the sleeve of her sweater. "This isn't just about a stupid comment. It's about me. I feel like I don't know, like I'm not living up to anything. I'm 30 years old, and what do I do that's interesting? Nothing. I don't want to be a nobody anymore." She looked at me with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't just a passing mood. "All right," I said, trying a different approach, "so what are you going to do about it?" "I already have a plan," she said, sitting up straighter. Her tears had dried, and now there was a strange glint in her eye. "I know someone who can help me. Someone very respected, someone who knows how to make people shine." "Who?" I asked. "That's a secret," she said, a small smile creeping onto her face. "But don't worry. You'll meet them soon. They're coming here, actually. It'll be a surprise for everyone. And," she added, leaning forward, "I need you to get everything ready for them. Set up the grill, prep the food. Make it nice. We need to impress them." I raised an eyebrow. "Impress them? Who exactly are these people?" "I told you, it's a surprise," she said firmly, standing up. "And you'll just have to trust me on this. But believe me, this is important. So, can you do it?" I stared at her for a moment, my mind racing with questions I didn't bother voicing. Then I nodded. "Fine. But you owe me an explanation later." As she walked away, clearly satisfied with herself, I stayed in the room, trying to wrap my head around everything. Impress someone? Prep the grill? Intrigue and secrets? I thought to myself, what kind of people are these that they're worth all this effort? Sunday morning rolled around, and my wife was up early, already getting ready as if she had some grand event to attend. She was standing in front of the mirror, meticulously applying makeup and styling her hair. When she emerged from the bedroom wearing a dress that could only be described as eye-catching, I couldn't help but ask, "Why are you wearing that? What's the occasion?" She looked at me as though the answer was obvious. People judge by appearances, she said matter-of-factly. If you look good, people are more inclined to be nice to you. I didn't entirely agree with her reasoning, but I wasn't in the mood to argue about it, so I just let it go. While I busied myself cleaning the house and setting up the grill, apparently, we were hosting some important guests, she was glued to her phone. She was speaking in hushed tones, walking from room to room, occasionally glancing my way but not saying much. I could only hear snippets of her conversations, and none of it made any sense to me. After a while, I stopped what I was doing and asked, "Are you going to help me with this, or am I handling everything on my own?" She waved me off, barely looking up. "Stop whining. I'll help in a minute." Half an hour passed, and I was still the only one working. Finally, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to answer it, expecting someone important based on all the secrecy and build-up. When I opened the door, I was greeted by the sight of a man dressed like a cowboy, complete with boots, a hat, and a belt buckle big enough to reflect sunlight into someone's eyes. Standing next to him was my wife's friend, who I'd grown to dislike over the years. She had a knack for bringing chaos wherever she went and seemed to cycle through boyfriends faster than most people change their wardrobe. My wife appeared beside me and quickly ushered them inside before I could say anything. Come in," she said, all smiles. Then, under her breath, she muttered to me, and maybe tried to look a little less grumpy. I didn't appreciate the comment, but I held my tongue. We all sat down in the living room, where drinks were poured and light conversation ensued. It didn't take long for my wife to get to the point. "Some people think I'm boring," she began, looking around the room dramatically. "So, I've decided to take up horseback riding. Isn't that exciting?" I was taken aback. "Horseback riding? Since when are you into that?" I asked. She wasn't exactly known for sticking to routines or hobbies, and this seemed like an odd choice. Before she could answer, her friend chimed in. "It's perfect. My new boyfriend here is going to help us. He's got everything, a ranch, an arena, horses, you name it." She gestured toward the cowboy, who had been staring a little too intently at my wife's chest for my liking. The cowboy finally spoke, his voice carrying a slight drawl. "That's right. My family owns a large estate. We've got top-notch facilities for riding and training. I'd be happy to teach y'all. In fact, we've got a special session planned for tomorrow. It's going to be private, very exclusive." He smiled, and I couldn't tell if he was trying to sell me on the idea or flirt with my wife. I narrowed my eyes at him, but before I could say anything, my wife shot me a look. It was one of those "let's not make a scene" looks, and I reluctantly stayed quiet. After a bit more small talk, they finally left, leaving the house quieter but no less tense. As I started cleaning up the empty glasses, I turned to my wife and said, "I don't like your friend. And I definitely don't like her boyfriend. He couldn't keep his eyes off you." She rolled her eyes. "You're always so suspicious. Not everyone is out to get me, you know. Do you even know what this special session tomorrow is supposed to be?" I asked, pressing the issue. She shook her head but smiled. "No idea. But I'm sure it'll be great. And I'm really looking forward to it." The day started like any other. I left the house early for work, expecting the usual texts and calls from my wife throughout the day. Normally, she'd be messaging me with updates about her plans or even just sending pictures of her lunch. But that day? Nothing. No messages, no missed calls. I tried reaching out to her a couple of times during my breaks, but she didn't pick up. It wasn't like her to go completely silent, and by the time I finished work, I was more annoyed than worried. I decided to head straight home to see what was going on. When I walked into the house, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Too quiet. Then I saw her, my wife, sprawled face down on the couch, still wearing that same dress she'd left the house in. On the armchairs nearby were her friend and the cowboy, both fast asleep and reeking of alcohol. The scene looked like the aftermath of some ridiculous party, and it took me a moment to process it all. I stood there for a moment, jaw tightening, before stepping into the living room. I clapped my hands loudly, startling them awake. The friend's boyfriend mumbled something incoherent as he tried to sit up, and her friend rubbed her eyes, clearly disoriented. My wife barely stirred. "All right," I said, my voice firm. "Time to go." I wasn't in the mood for pleasantries, so I helped them gather their things and ushered them out the door. I drove the two of them back to wherever they came from, dropping them off without saying much more than necessary. When I returned home, my wife had finally woken up and was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a glass of water. She looked up at me, bleary-eyed but smiling. "What was that all about?" I asked, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. She shrugged, brushing her hair out of her face. "It was amazing," she said, her tone bright despite her obvious hangover. "We had such a good time. After the lesson, we came back here to celebrate." I frowned. "Celebrate what, exactly?" That's when she pulled out her phone and started showing me videos of herself riding a horse. "Look at this," she said, grinning. "I'm not half bad, right?" I watched the videos without saying much, but when she was done, I set my jaw and said, "Listen. If this kind of thing happens again, you're not going back there. I'll find you a new trainer myself." My tone left no room for argument, but she, of course, had to push back. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're always so serious. You ruin all the fun." I ignored the jab and asked, "And why were you wearing that dress to the stables?" "It's completely inappropriate." She shrugged again. "I like wearing it." "What's the big deal?" That answer didn't sit well with me, but I decided to drop it for the time being. Instead, I told her about my plans to hang out with my friends next weekend, thinking that would be the end of it. "Well, you're going to have to cancel," she said casually. "You're invited to come with me to the stables instead. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss this." I stared at her, incredulous. "I already made plans," I said firmly. "I'm not changing them." She gave me a sly smile, leaning forward slightly. "Do it for me," she said in a tone that was half playful, half serious. "Besides, I know you're just jealous. This way, you can see for yourself that there's nothing to worry about. Plus, there's a surprise waiting for you." "What kind of surprise?" I asked, not bothering to hide my skepticism. She winked. "That's a secret. You'll find out when we get there." A week passed, and finally, the day my wife had been eagerly waiting for arrived. She was up early, buzzing with excitement as we prepared to head to the stables. I wasn't particularly thrilled, but I kept my thoughts to myself as we drove out to the countryside. When we arrived, her friend and the cowboy were already waiting for us, dressed in their typical over-the-top outfits. They greeted us warmly and wasted no time in leading us away from the main stable area. I followed, curious but skeptical, as they guided us along a narrow path. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked after a few minutes. The cowboy turned his head slightly and smiled. "To meet a special horse," he said cryptically. That answer didn't satisfy me, but I didn't push further. We continued walking until we reached a small, separate building. It looked more like a shed than a stable, with faded paint and vines creeping up the sides. The cowboy swung the door open dramatically, revealing the inside. The room was decorated in a bizarre way. Strings of lights hung across the ceiling, casting a dim glow. In one corner stood a horse, calmly chewing on hay. But what caught my attention was the presence of a bed in the middle of the room. It was an old, worn-out mattress covered with a tattered blanket. "What is this?" I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. "Why is there a bed in here?" The cowboy shrugged, his expression almost sheepish. "This was my favorite spot as a kid," he explained. "I used to spend hours here with this horse. It's my favorite." His tone was casual, but the explanation didn't sit right with me. As I looked closer, I noticed some questionable stains on the mattress. "And what's that?" I asked, pointing at the spots. My wife nudged me hard in the side, muttering, "Stop making a scene." The cowboy laughed nervously. "Oh, it's just an old mattress," he said quickly. We moved on from the awkward moment, and they saddled up the horse for a brief demonstration. My wife was clearly enjoying herself, laughing and chatting with her friend. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but notice how the cowboy's eyes lingered on her a little too long. Every time she spoke, he seemed overly attentive, hanging on her every word. It was irritating, but I decided to bide my time. Eventually, her friend excused herself, pulling my wife along for a quick trip to the bathroom. This left me alone with the cowboy. I decided to take the opportunity to address what had been bothering me all afternoon. "What's with the way you've been looking at my wife?" I asked, my tone direct. The question caught him off guard. He stammered for a moment before managing to say, "It's nothing like that. I have a girlfriend, you know. I'm just being polite." I didn't buy his excuse but decided not to press further. Instead, I leaned in slightly and said, "Just remember, I'm watching. Don't give me a reason to think otherwise." He nodded quickly, looking relieved when the women returned. The rest of the session went by without much incident, but I remained on edge, keeping a close eye on him. As the day came to an end, we thanked them for the lesson and prepared to head home. On the drive back, my wife seemed unusually quiet, lost in thought. I finally broke the silence. "You seem to have fun today," I said, trying to gauge her mood. She nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, it was good. But I need to tell you something when we get home." I raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "What is it?" She shook her head, her smile widening slightly. "Don't get upset," she said, her tone playful but firm. "I'll explain everything. Just wait until we're home." That only made me more curious, but I decided to wait, even if it felt like she was deliberately dragging out the suspense. When we got back home, my wife immediately turned to me with a peculiar expression. "I need to help my friend with her move," she said, almost as if she had rehearsed the line. "She's asked me to go over there and help unpack, organize, all that kind of stuff. But don't worry, it's not just work. There's a reward." She raised her eyebrows like she was letting me in on a secret. "A reward?" I asked, crossing my arms. "What kind of reward?" She smiled, clearly excited. "They're planning a private party afterward. Apparently, her boyfriend has a ton of influential friends. It could be a great opportunity to meet people, make connections. Who knows what could come of it?" Her enthusiasm was almost contagious, but I wasn't entirely convinced. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "But keep me updated. I don't like the idea of you disappearing for hours without a word. You know how much trouble your friend tends to attract." My tone was firm, but she just waved me off with a laugh. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "She's not that bad. You're just too uptight. Besides, it'll be fine. I'll let you know what's going on." With that, she grabbed her phone and wandered off, already engrossed in a conversation that seemed to require her full attention. Over the next couple of days, I couldn't help but notice how much time she was spending on the phone with her friend. Normally, when she was on a call, the entire house would hear about it. She had a habit of pacing back and forth, practically shouting into the receiver. This time, though, it was different. She spoke quietly, almost in whispers, and she stayed in one spot, as if she didn't want me overhearing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the change in behavior was noticeable. Even when I walked into the room where she was, she'd lower her voice or end the call quickly, claiming it was just a boring conversation about logistics. It was unlike her to be so secretive, and it left me with more questions than answers. One evening, while I was watching TV, I glanced over to see her sitting in the corner, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't laughing or shouting as she usually did during her calls. Instead, she was speaking in a low, deliberate tone, occasionally glancing in my direction as if to check whether I was paying attention. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something about the way she was acting felt off. Normally, she'd share every detail about her plans, no matter how mundane. But now, she was keeping things to herself, speaking in hushed tones, and brushing off my questions with vague answers. It wasn't like her at all, and it only made me more curious about what exactly was going on. As the days went on, the pattern continued. She'd spend hours on the phone with her friend, her voice always quiet and measured. It stood out to me, not just because it was unusual, but because it was the complete opposite of how she normally behaved. I didn't say anything yet, but I made a mental note to keep an eye on things. Something wasn't adding up, and I intended to figure out what it was. The week was a blur of long work days and mounting responsibilities. With added pressure at the office, I barely had time to notice my wife's increasing absences. She'd been coming home later than usual, often with little explanation, and I didn't have the energy to press her for details. When she did show up, she was either on her phone or exhausted, barely engaging in conversation. By the end of the week, I was focused on my own workload, assuming she was handling her own plans without any real concern from me. One evening, she came home visibly tipsy, her cheeks flushed and her words slightly slurred. "You're not going to believe it," she said, kicking off her shoes with a giggle. "They've done such an amazing job with the house. You'll be blown away tomorrow." I blinked at her, trying to process what she was saying. "What house? What are you talking about?" She waved her hand dismissively, too amused to answer seriously. "You'll see. Just get ready. Tomorrow's going to be special." I didn't bother pressing for more information. Instead, I headed to bed, my thoughts too scattered to make sense of her cryptic excitement. The next morning, she was up before me, practically bouncing with energy. "I'm driving," she announced, grabbing her keys. "I know exactly where we're going." I was too groggy to argue and figured it wasn't worth the hassle. "Fine," I muttered. "Lead the way." The drive was quiet, save for her occasional hum of anticipation. When we pulled into the stables, I frowned. "Why are we here again?" I asked, my tone edged with suspicion. She grinned, her eyes gleaming with mischief. "Just trust me," she said. Reluctantly, I followed her inside, where her friend and the cowboy were waiting. They greeted us enthusiastically, then led us past the main stable area and into a large hall. The hall was bustling with people, and for a moment, it seemed like a genuine event. The decorations were elegant, and the atmosphere was lively. I started to relax, thinking maybe I had misjudged the situation. But then the cowboy climbed onto a table, raising a glass as he called for everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with a dramatic flair, "we're about to take this celebration to the next level. Follow me to the stables for something truly unforgettable." The crowd erupted in cheers and laughter as they began filing out of the hall. My wife grabbed my arm, urging me to follow along. I went reluctantly, my unease returning with every step. When we reached the stables, my stomach sank. The scene was bizarre, mattresses scattered across the floor, and people pairing off with knowing smiles. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was happening. "We're leaving," I said firmly, grabbing my wife's hand. She looked at me in shock, pulling back slightly. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "You're making a scene." "I don't care," I snapped. "This is completely unacceptable. You're not staying here." Ignoring her protests, I led her out to the car and drove off without a word. Once we were on the road, she finally broke the silence. "You embarrass me," she said, crossing her arms. "You didn't even try to understand. They're good people. They just have unconventional hobbies." I gritted my teeth, struggling to keep my temper in check. "Good people don't behave like that. I'm finding you a new trainer." End of discussion. She sighed dramatically, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Fine," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "But I'll still need to stop by her place later. She has a special gift for you, you know." I glanced at her, skeptical. "A gift?" She nodded, her expression softening. Yes. Because they actually like you. They don't judge you for your opinions, no matter how rigid they might be. The next morning, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I'd had enough of the chaos surrounding my wife's current arrangements, so I found her a new trainer. This one came highly recommended and seemed to have a solid reputation. When I told my wife about the plan, she didn't seem thrilled. In fact, she looked downright skeptical, but she didn't argue. We got in the car and drove to the new stable, where we met the trainer, a young woman with a professional demeanor and an air of confidence that immediately set her apart from the cowboy. As we introduced ourselves, it was clear that my wife wasn't going to make this easy. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression neutral but clearly guarded. I pulled her aside and said quietly, "Look, I'm doing this for you. Not for me, not for anyone else. Just give it a chance, all right?" She sighed and nodded reluctantly, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. The trial session began, and I stayed back to watch. The new trainer was patient and methodical, explaining every step in detail and making sure my wife felt comfortable. Despite her initial resistance, my wife seemed to settle in as the lesson progressed. By the end, she even managed a small smile, though she didn't say much as we left. I took it as a sign that the session had gone better than she expected. Afterward, we stopped by her friend's house. My wife went inside while I waited in the car, scrolling through emails and trying to catch up on work. She was gone for a while, and when she finally came out, she was carrying an expensive-looking garment bag. Her friend followed, smiling in that way that always made me suspicious. "Sorry about all the trouble," her friend said as she leaned against the car. "I really thought you two would enjoy yourselves." I didn't bother hiding my irritation. "I'm not interested in being part of whatever that was," I said flatly. Her smile didn't falter. "That's your choice," she said lightly, stepping back as my wife got into the car. The ride home was quiet, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was my boss, and the tone of his voice left no room for negotiation. "We have a critical project," he said. "It's incredibly urgent, and I need you to handle it. You'll have to leave for a business trip tomorrow morning. The work is demanding, but the pay will reflect that, 3 times your usual rate." I agreed without hesitation. Work was work, and this sounded like an opportunity too good to pass up. When I told my wife about the trip, she didn't seem fazed. If anything, she seemed almost relieved. "That's fine," she said. "It'll give me more time to get used to the new trainer. And I might take the chance to visit my mom while you're away. It'll be good for both of us." Her response caught me off guard, but I didn't question it. If she was content, then so was I. As I packed my bags later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than she was letting on. But I pushed the thought aside. Work needed my full attention, and for now, everything else would have to wait. The business trip started smoothly enough. I was busy with meetings and tasks, focused on handling the demands of the project. 2 days in, however, I received an unexpected call from my wife's new horse trainer. "Hey," she said cautiously, "I just wanted to check in. Your wife hasn't shown up for any of her lessons this week. Is everything okay?" The question caught me off guard. I assumed everything was fine at home, but now doubt began to creep in. "I'll look into it," I replied curtly before ending the call. As soon as I had a moment, I tried calling my wife. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I called again later in the day with the same result. By the 3rd attempt, frustration was building. She never ignored my calls like this, and it wasn't like her to be so unresponsive. The pattern continued for the rest of the week. I called in the mornings, during my lunch breaks, and even late at night, but there was no answer. Not even a text. It was infuriating, and I couldn't help but feel something was wrong. Finally, on the last day of my trip, as I was heading back home, I received a message from her. "Lost my phone when I was visiting Mom. Bought a new one. All good now." That was it. No explanation, no apology for being unreachable. When I walked through the door that evening, she was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. I noticed immediately that she looked slightly off, her hair was disheveled, and there was a faint redness around her eyes. But what stood out most was the subtle smell of alcohol on her breath. It wasn't overpowering, but it was enough to make me raise an eyebrow. "Tough week?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She shrugged, her back to me as she stirred something on the stove. "You could say that. A lot going on." Her response was vague, and she didn't offer any more details. As she busied herself with the meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't adding up. While she was distracted, I grabbed my laptop and opened up iCloud. If her old phone was lost, its location should show up on the account. Sure enough, the tracking feature was still active, and it revealed something strange: the phone wasn't lost at all. It was sitting at the old stables we'd visited weeks ago. My jaw tightened as I stared at the screen. What was it doing there? "Dinner's ready," she called, pulling me out of my thoughts. I quickly closed the laptop and joined her at the table, though my mind was racing. As we ate, she began talking casually about her plans for the next day. "I need to run an errand with my friend," she said. "She's looking for a gift for her husband, and I'm helping her pick something out. I might be out for a while." "What kind of gift?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light while probing for more information. Her answers were vague and hesitant, filled with pauses and half-hearted explanations. It was clear she wasn't being entirely honest. By the time we finished eating, my suspicions had only grown. Whatever she was hiding, I needed to find out. If her phone was at the stables, then that was where I would start. By the time evening rolled around, my wife was already on her way out. She claimed she had errands to run with her friend, leaving the house with barely a word. I acted as though I had work to attend to myself, but in reality, I had other plans. Despite being on leave after my trip, I grabbed my keys and left shortly after her, waiting in my car until I was sure she was gone. Once the coast was clear, I headed for the stables, determined to figure out what she was hiding. When I arrived, the place was eerily quiet. The main stable area, usually bustling with activity, was completely empty. I moved carefully, making sure not to make any noise as I stepped inside. The first thing that caught my eye was the mess on the floor. Scattered across the dirt were discarded items that didn't belong there, including an unsettling amount of used contraceptives. The sight alone was enough to set my blood boiling. I scanned the area, but found no one. It was clear this wasn't where they were gathering. My mind went back to the separate shed I'd seen during our previous visit. If anything was happening, it would be there. Taking a deep breath, I made my way toward the smaller building, my footsteps barely audible on the gravel path. As I got closer, faint noises reached my ears. At first, I couldn't make them out, but as I approached, the sounds became unmistakable. I hesitated for a moment before peering through a crack in the door. What I saw made my stomach turn. My wife was engaged in unspeakable acts with one of the animals, surrounded by a group of people who seemed disturbingly entertained. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she went on to betray me further, this time with an older man I recognized from the party weeks ago. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat, and pulled out my phone. Shaking with anger, I recorded everything. Once I had enough footage, I left. My hands were trembling as I drove home, but my mind was focused. There was no coming back from this, and I wasn't going to waste time confronting her in the heat of the moment. Instead, I contacted a lawyer that same night. We discussed my situation, and I began making arrangements for what came next. By the time I finished, I knew exactly how I was going to handle her. That same evening, I called her 6 times, each call more urgent than the last. When she finally answered, I made sure my voice sounded frantic. "The house has been robbed," I shouted into the phone. "Get home now." I already called the police. The urgency in my tone must have worked because she was back within half an hour, her face pale as she rushed through the door. I was waiting for her in the living room, calm but firm. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the couch. She looked at me suspiciously, but did as I asked. Before we start, I continued, go to the pantry and grab the bottle of whiskey. We're going to need it. She stood up, still confused, and headed to the pantry. As she rummaged around, she called back over her shoulder, "What is this all about? What are you trying to pull?" I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile on my face. "It's my turn to create some intrigue," I said, my voice steady. The game had just begun. As soon as she stepped into the pantry to grab the whiskey, I quietly moved to the door and locked it from the outside. It took her a moment to realize what had happened, and then she started banging on the door. "What are you doing?" she yelled, her voice muffled but furious. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I walked calmly through the house, gathering her belongings. I grabbed garbage bags from the kitchen and started stuffing her clothes, shoes, and whatever else I could find into them. The sound of the banging grew louder, accompanied by a stream of curses and demands. "You're out of your mind." "Let me out," she screamed. I ignored her, my focus solely on clearing out everything that belonged to her. When the first bag was full, I carried it to the window and dumped its contents onto the lawn below. One by one, the bags followed, each landing with a satisfying thud. "You have no right to do this," she shouted from behind the locked door. I paused, turning to face the pantry door. "Then why was your phone at the old stables?" "The one you said you lost?" I said, my tone cold and measured. The banging stopped for a moment, replaced by a stunned silence. Then her voice came again, quieter but no less angry. "How do you even know that?" she demanded. I didn't answer, continuing to work until every last one of her possessions was either on the lawn or in the garbage. When I finally unlocked the pantry door, she stormed out, her face red with fury. "Where are my things?" she demanded, glaring at me. I gestured toward the window. "Outside." "Go take a look," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She rushed to the front door, throwing it open and gasping as she saw the pile of her belongings scattered across the yard. She turned back to me, tears of rage streaming down her face. "You're insane," she said, her voice breaking. I stepped forward, meeting her gaze. "No, I'm done. We're done. You can take your things and go to your mom's house. This marriage is over." She stared at me, disbelief mingling with her anger. Her voice rose to a shrill pitch as she began screaming at me, accusing me of overreacting and calling me every name she could think of. She ran outside, frantically trying to gather her things, but I didn't follow. Instead, I calmly closed the door and locked it behind her. From the other side, I could hear her pounding on the door. "Let me back in." "You can't do this to me," she yelled. I stood near the window, watching her through the curtain as she continued her tirade. It's funny, I called out loud enough for her to hear. How trash has a way of taking itself out. "You know what? You're right, I can't do this to you. That's why I'm divorcing you. Go to your mom's, and don't come back." Her face twisted with rage, and before she stormed off, she shouted, "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." With the decision to end the marriage firmly in place, I wasted no time setting things in motion. My first priority was ensuring that I protected myself legally and financially. While my lawyer began drafting the divorce papers, I gathered every document related to the house. It didn't take long to confirm what I already knew: the house was entirely mine. I'd purchased it before we got married, and not a single penny of her money had gone into it. That knowledge gave me the leverage I needed to act quickly. Rather than risk whatever she might be planning, I decided to sell the house immediately. I listed it for a price just below market value, knowing it would attract buyers quickly. Within 2 days, I had a serious offer and finalized the sale. By the end of the week, I was packing up my belongings and preparing to leave. Whatever she thought she was going to do, she wouldn't be able to do it here. With the house taken care of, I turned my attention to a different matter: the stables. The video I had recorded at the shed wasn't just incriminating, it was devastating. I tracked down the owner of the stables, a well-known figure in the local community, and sent him the footage. His reaction was exactly what I expected: shock, disgust, and a promise to take immediate action against his son, who had been deeply involved in the events captured on tape. But I didn't stop there. Using social media and some clever online tools like Google Lens, I managed to identify several other people who had attended that infamous party. Some of them held high-ranking positions in prominent companies. Armed with this information, I reached out to their employers, attaching the footage as evidence. It didn't take long for the responses to start coming in. One by one, I received confirmations that disciplinary actions were being taken. For some, it meant demotion; for others, outright termination. The fallout was massive, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. A few days later, my phone rang. It was my wife's friend, the one who had been involved in all of this from the start. Her voice was shaking with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she screamed. "You've ruined lives. Careers are destroyed. And her boyfriend's father kicked him out of the house because of you." I leaned back in my chair, letting her rant, while a smirk played on my lips. When she finally paused for breath, I responded calmly. "I only exposed the truth. If their lives are ruined, they have no one to blame but themselves." My words only seemed to enrage her further, and she hung up on me with a final string of curses. The satisfaction of seeing the consequences of their actions unfold was undeniable, but I knew I wasn't done yet. There was still more to come. My focus shifted back to my soon-to-be ex-wife. She thought she could manipulate and deceive me without consequences, but I was about to show her just how wrong she was. Later that evening, as I reviewed the final steps of my plan, I couldn't help but laugh to myself. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about ensuring that everyone involved faced the full weight of their choices. As I closed my laptop, a single thought crossed my mind. "This is far from over," I said aloud, chuckling. "She has no idea what's coming." The day of the divorce finally arrived, and everything went as planned. The documents were signed, and the split was finalized. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. She was officially out of my life, and I had managed to protect everything that mattered to me. The house was already sold, and I had moved into a new place, far from the chaos she brought with her. She, on the other hand, was left with nothing. No house, no money, no leverage. Settling into my new life was easier than I thought. Without her constant drama, I could focus on my work and rebuild in peace. The days were quiet, almost too quiet, but I preferred it that way. The fallout from everything she had done was still fresh, but I was determined not to let it define my future. It was a clean break, and I intended to keep it that way. A few weeks later, my phone rang unexpectedly. It was her mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce proceedings began, so I was surprised to hear from her. Her voice was shaky and filled with concern. "Do you know what happened?" she asked. "The police arrested her." That caught my attention. "What for?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "She tried to break into your old house," her mother explained. "She thought you still lived there, but you don't, do you?" I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. "No, I don't. I sold it weeks ago." Apparently, my ex-wife had gone to the house in a fit of rage, smashing windows and vandalizing the property, only to realize too late that it belonged to someone else. The new owners called the police, and she was promptly arrested. Her mother sounded both embarrassed and distressed. "I don't know what to do with her anymore," she said. "She's completely out of control." I let her vent for a while, my emotions a mix of amusement and pity. When she finally paused, I said, "Look, this isn't my problem anymore. I'm not responsible for her actions. You need to keep an eye on her before she causes even more damage." The conversation ended soon after, and I couldn't help but shake my head at the absurdity of it all. It seemed like she hadn't learned anything from the divorce or the mess she created. She was still the same reckless, impulsive person, and now she was facing the consequences without me to shield her. It wasn't my concern anymore, and I was content to leave it at that. Later, I found out that she had been fined heavily for the damage she caused to the property. The new owners weren't willing to let her off easy, and the court agreed. The fine was massive, enough to ensure she would feel the sting for years to come. It was a fitting end to her spiral of poor decisions. As for me, life continued to improve. With the divorce behind me, I focused on building a better future. My work thrived, and I enjoyed the peace that came with being free from her chaos. Every now and then, I thought about the drama she tried to create, but it was always with a sense of relief that I had left it all behind. She was someone else's problem now, and I had no intention of looking back.